He was actually pulling double duty for me. So he was running the compliance department and the fleet department while undertaking two very, very challenging problems within the city. And so just wanted to kind of give a shout out to him. Also have Denise with me here. Denise knows more about the fleet budget than I will ever forget. So she is here to help us with all of the data and the numbers. I just wanted to say quickly that a lot has happened in the past year since we met with you on the fleet budget before. And, you know, I remember giving this presentation about a year ago, and it was a lot of doom and gloom. There was a lot of stark reality to the amount of need within this division. And I have to say that I am hopeful. I'm encouraged by the direction that we're going in, and that is in no small part due to Isaac's contribution and his bringing this sort of business mindset to this problem. What we have done in the past year is we have hired, as Sylvia alluded to, we have hired a consultant who is an industry expert, Utilimark. They compared us against many other jurisdictions throughout the country to give us an idea of where we stand. That data was used to kind of inform a 10-year business plan that Isaac has put together. And also what we've done in the past year is we've met with every single department to do an analysis of their fleet and to see where they are and to see if there was any ability to sort of reduce the fleet. And I'm happy to say, without stealing any of their thunder, that was a successful endeavor, and we'll update you on that as well. You know, the fleet is over 1,100 vehicles, and when we say vehicles, we're not talking about lawnmowers and weed whackers. So there are a lot of machines that the fleet is tasked with taking care of. That fleet is approximately worth $80 million, and if you think about it, doing easy math, $80 million, if you were to keep a car for 10 years, you'd anticipate putting away, you know, 1/10 of that every year so that you could replace it in 10 years. And, you know, we're not doing that. We're not doing that within the city. And we need to acknowledge the current budget situation that we're in. The fleet fund is an internal service fund that is reliant upon general fund dollars to maintain the fleet that services all of the departments in the city, and we're not keeping up. And an $80 million asset requires a lot of investment. So with that brief introduction, and I will say also the second paragraph of the staff report that Sylvia put together, you know, when I read it, the numbers are accurate, but it's a little bit hard to decipher. So we're talking about overall fleet fund, which includes revenue and expenditure. And so it looks like really big numbers, but there isn't that big of an increase. So with that, Isaac, do you want to give the presentation?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, council members. I just put together a few slides, and then I'd like to give you guys plenty of time to ask any questions that you may have. As Lisa mentioned, fleet has 1,100 vehicles, but we actually maintain closer to 3,500 pieces of equipment if you count everything that we maintain. We do that with a very small staff, and we're broke up into 3 different units. We have the light shop, the heavy shop, and then the small equipment. Our heavy equipment is a rather small part of our fleet, but it is the majority of our expense. When you're talking about a fire truck that costs $1.2 million and a fire engine that costs $680,000, that's a lot more than, you know, a $35,000 pickup truck that's used in the parks. So overall, here's what we've proposed to do with the budget that we've been given this year. We would be able to replace 33 total units this year. 5 of those are fire units, 4 fire engines, and 1 fire truck. 3 police patrol vehicles, 1 heavy duty, which is a dump truck for the streets department, 7 light duty, which are broke up into public services and several other departments. Basically,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could I get you to pull that microphone really close and pretend you're a rock star? Because
okay.
it's hard to hear. Thank you.
Yep. So the 7 light duty are small units throughout the city, pickup trucks and sedans, and then 17 pieces of equipment. That number seems quite high when you look at, okay, we're talking about vehicles, why are we replacing so much equipment? A lot of that equipment, for example, is the compressors that they use to blow out the cracks on the streets. Those are large pieces of equipment that cost around $30,000. On the bottom of the screen, I've provided a couple of the pieces of equipment that we're proposing to replace. The top one, I believe, I'm sorry, the third one down is one of those compressors that we're talking about. As on the far right, it shows the total maintenance of $30,000, where the replacement of that is $29,000 for a new one. That's really, in the past, you guys have heard a lot about points and the replacement list. We still use that for some internal use, but we've done more of an overall on that, and we're trying, or an overhaul on that, and we are taking into consideration many other things, including the expertise of our mechanics to say, you know what, that thing's been in here so much, we've put $4,500 into that unit this year. It's getting to that point that we just know it's going to be a catastrophic failure. So that is the 33 pieces of equipment we're proposing to use the budget this year for. 6 of those are heavy equipment, so the 5 fire trucks and the dump truck, those would be debt service, so a lease purchase on those 6 units, and then the rest would be cash purchases.
Mr. Chair? The fire vehicles, are they not impact fee eligible?
They're only impact fee eligible if they're utilized for new function, so not replacement.
Are you? If we could clarify that, because I think that what the state, when the state changed that law a couple of years ago, it was, I don't know if there was a condition put on it, but if you or someone from the mayor's office can look into that issue, because that leads me to another issue that I want to bring up later in this discussion. But
Thank you. Yeah, definitely we'll look into it.
cool.
As Lisa mentioned, we had Utilimark come in before I came in as the director. They did a study. This is a breakdown of their analysis of our labor hours. As you can see, we're actually on the high end of the statistics, where the average is around 1,366 hours. We're about 60 hours above that, or I'm sorry, 80 hours above that per mechanic. But we are also very far behind on the preventative maintenance that needs to be done on these vehicles. As they've recommended that we are about 6 positions short. What we would propose this year is to bring on 3 new technicians and then cover the rest with overtime. And the goal is that this wouldn't be in perpetuity. This would be as we have older techs retire in 5 to 6 years, and hopefully we are able to get a budget that we can start replacing vehicles sooner. We wouldn't have that need in the future. So it wouldn't be, hey, we need technicians now and then we have to do a reduction in force or something like that farther down the line.
So Isaac, whenever I hear overtime, I'm drawn to a question about, are you paying enough overtime to justify another FTE, and how do you reconcile that? So am I hearing you say that you don't, assuming a different budget scenario going forward, are you saying you don't think you need those tech positions long term, and that's why you're looking at overtime? Or is it something that you're going to have to adjust based on your budget?
So it's a midterm distance of need that we're looking at. Basically, as long as our fleet continues to get older, we're going to have a greater need for these guys to be working on the vehicles. Until we can start replacing vehicles sooner, and we have data that can show, kind of portray that and show you how we can save money, so the money in the end would go from one side of the budget to the other side. But it is a 7-year fix, basically. So it is a long-term commitment with the hope that we can reduce in the future.
Okay, so something that I was going to say I'll be interested in seeing next year, but I won't be here next year. The other people might be interested in seeing next year is just that assessment of how much overtime you're paying and whether or not we're better off looking at a FTE to fill in to help relieve some of that overtime. And I know that overtime can be a perk, and so I'm not trying to get into that sort of discussion. I'm really just trying to say as how much time are you spending on overtime, and what could you justify another position by shifting some of that?
Technically, I can tell you right now, we're looking at 4,800 hours of overtime for the year. But we balancing that of, do we really have that need, and how soon before that plan can take place. So that was one of the findings in the analysis. This next slide basically shows you the average age of our vehicles in 2008 compared to now. As you can see, a lot of those, the red line represents the optimal time of replacement for that type of vehicle. As you can see, a lot of our vehicles were below that, but at this point, every one of our vehicle classes is beyond the recommended life of that vehicle. There's a couple discrepancies on this graph, but in general, this is where we're at. The two discrepancies are the sedan and the dump trucks. Those numbers got escalated somehow on the blue graphs, but they're both greater than what it was in 2008 still. The purpose of showing you this is this next graph kind of explains what that previous graph was showing. As the age goes up, you can see our maintenance costs just continue to go up and up and up. A couple of photos of the vehicles that we have there. Those are vehicles that are on our replacement list. The one is on the replacement list, the other one is not. That fire truck really is in bad shape, but that's not one of the 5 that's on this list. There's 5 that are in worse shape than that one of the photo. The bigger thing that we want you guys to really know about this graph is that if we have vehicles that are newer, it's common sense that the cost of maintenance is going to go down. And if we can get ahead of where we're at, that money is going to drop off, which would then in return hopefully be able to be reinvested in more replacement to get that back down, closer to the $3 to $4 million a year range rather than the 6.5 that we're at right now. Lisa mentioned this already, but we do have, this is basically the historical costs in our vehicles. As you can see, the biggest thing isn't the number of vehicles being increased, it's actually I've lost the word. Well, the total asset value, but the increased costs to replace a vehicle. Why? Inflation, thank you. You guys have me a little flustered here, so sorry. The inflation's the biggest thing. Fire trucks and dump trucks right now, we're seeing above 17% per year. And in some areas, that's even greater than that. So just keep that in mind. As you can see, the yellow is where our funding has been. It went up this last year to $6.5 million because of the $1.5 million for budget amendment for the police vehicles. This year is, again, basically flat from last year of $5 million for replacement. The numbers on the staff report are accurate, but there is does require a little bit of explanation because it shows that we have a replacement budget of 10.3 basically. But actually $4 million of that is debt service and money that we're taking out of our fund balance. So it's actually not an increase, it's just funding coming from other sources to get those vehicles. We also did a lot of work, and Fleet did a lot of work before I got here. They actually met with the finance department and public services, and they met with every department and talked about what vehicles they could get rid of, if any. And we had several departments commit for a total of 48 vehicles that we're going to be able to reduce the fleet by and not have to replace in the future. We're in the process of getting the information out of saying, okay, now you need to turn those vehicles into us. We haven't actually received all of them yet, but that will happen here in the next month. One thing I wanted to kind of share with you guys is the replacement, or we call it the sweet spot. There is, empirical data that shows us when a vehicle should be replaced. On this, you'll see the blue line basically shows the increased cost of maintenance. The green is the value of the vehicle. And market-wide, basically where those two meet is where you should be replacing. We have kind of an interesting thing in the city, especially in the police units, where after a certain point, they don't get used as many miles as they did up until the after the 5-year mark as they did beforehand. So we had to project that if these vehicles had 27,000 miles put on them every year, this would be the true cost of maintenance on it,
Mr. Chair,
and it skyrockets.
may I ask you a question about that? Have you determined why it is they quit using them as much? What, is it because they're having a problem with them, or?
They're broke
What
down so
happens?
much that they're basically shuffling cars from one to the next person. This one comes in, we'll give you the next one that comes out. But that's basically
So it's
where
because they're
at.
not running well that
Right.
they're pulled?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And that's basically it for the presentation that I wanted to share with you guys today. Do you have any questions or comments?
Questions? Okay. Oh, Aaron, go ahead.
Is this presentation electronically wasn't in our packet, was it? Is that something, I've had questions from constituents about the fleet and I try to explain the graphs that are so much better depicted this way. I'd love to be able to share this. Is this something you could send our way in
Certainly,
electronic
yeah.
version?
I can forward it.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Charlie.
Thank you very much. This information is very good to have. One of the concerns that I have for my colleagues is that if we look at this and then hearing in the past years and seeing that we're really not making a lot of progress, I think we're going to have to do something similar to what we're talking about doing with streets, where we get creative about how we fund and tackle this problem, because as long as we continue to put off committing or making the commitment necessary to deal with this issue, it's only going to get more and more expensive. One of the things that I'd be very interested in as a member of the Council Legislative Subcommittee, but then also, I'll direct this to the Mayor's office as well. One of the things that I really want to look at for this coming legislative session is looking at how the legislature a couple of years ago dealt with the fire apparatus issue in impact fees. And again, my recollection was that there isn't, the same tie to that equipment as there is with maintenance, where you can't use impact fees for street maintenance and things like that, only construction. I think it's a little bit more difficult to bind the use of a fire apparatus. But what I would really like to do is to work with the Utah League of Cities and Towns to find someone to work with us on amending that bill so that we can use police impact fees for police fleet vehicles as well. That really is one of the only ways that I think we can really start having an impact on this, because our police fleet will always have high mileage. We're never going to be able to replace it in our general fund the way that we need to. And if we were able to have the legislature allow us to have some of that flexibility to use impact fees that we're already collecting for police fleet, similar to what we're doing now with fire fleet, that's one way that I think we can start making some progress on this issue.
Thank you, Charlie. Andrew?
I have one question that's a little off. Going back to the fire truck discussion, do you know the nature of the increases, why they appreciate so much in cost? 17% is like a house.
It really is. Basically, anything that is yellow steel or heavy duty has seen extreme increases over the last 5 to 7 years. And it continues to go up. I think the big part of it is the demand. fleets across the country are aged and making orders at the same time. And I know of 2 new companies that have come out to make fire trucks, but it's still a supply and demand issue.
The second question was recommended budget for a 10-year plan. How much could you talk about any of those, the revenue sources that are identified in here? This is sort of projecting out, I mean, several years, but 10 years. Can you give me a sense of this revenues? I mean, current take-home first responder fees, insurance budget, the sale of vehicles. I mean, what are those based on, and how? Yeah.
So this is the budget plan, or the 10-year business plan that we put together for the budget, and it basically breaks it down for each need. Basically, this was, if we could have all the money that we could, and we realized that we can't do that right now. But this was basically we set 3 things out. We wanted to be able to get everything under the recommended age. We wanted to get rid of debt service, and we needed to have a time frame of when that would be done. So basically, this proposed budget breaks that down to get us out of debt service after 7 years. There's still some remaining debt there that we still have to pay for a couple more years after that. But that was the goal, is to stop borrowing money for those. And the biggest reason for that is just the recommendations we've received and what we're expecting interest rates to go to, that we just didn't expect those opportunities to be as good as they are right now, where we're at 2% or less. But basically, we would see the initial investment would be hard, because right now our vehicles are so old, we would not be able to get much from those vehicles when we turn them in. But then, as you see, over the next, it would take 5 years to get there, but then we're actually able to generate between $500,000 to $1.5 million a year in the sale of vehicles, because they're in a better state than what we're selling them at right now, which then helps us save more money on the purchase. I had a couple other graphs here, and I don't want to jump into the weeds too much, but this graph is a sample of what we would be looking at right now for a vehicle. Let's see, I'm sorry, the graph on the right, this is 2 different vehicle classes, but if you look at the one on the left, the all blue, the one is the cost of the vehicle, and then the dark blue is actually what it costs us to keep that vehicle on the road for the 12 years that we're keeping it. So we're spending more than it's worth to keep it on the road. Where the one on the left, the lower blue, the light blue, is the initial purchase of the first vehicle, minus what we could sell it for, plus the second vehicle. And then the dark blue is what it would cost to maintain both of those vehicles over their optimal lives. And the yellow is the savings that we would see in that vehicle. If we, for example, the police vehicle, if we got rid of those every 5.1 years, is what our data says is the optimal time, rather than keeping them for, we have some that are 11 and 12 years old right now.
This is for commercial vehicles, but the heavy vehicles like the fire apparatus and those kind of things, are those not resellable? You run them into the ground essentially, and then
Right now we're running them into the ground. A fire vehicle optimally should be sold between 10 and 13 years. Ours we're getting rid of between 15 and 17 years right now. So the ones that we're sending to auction this year, we're expecting to get maybe 20,000 out of a $1.2 million vehicle.
So the concept is, after 7 years, we don't finance things anymore, or is that still an idea for the major apparatus, depending on?
It
Impact
would still
fees.
be an option, but our parameters initially, and again, that the same parameters were given to Utilimark when they did their analysis, was no more debt service. So that's still an option, but really it was a conservative look of, can we get out of this, and not knowing where interest rates were
But
going to be.
ideally, going forward, you could fund fleet without financing anything after a certain
After 7
point,
years, yeah.
assuming we don't cut into it again with another downturn.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Aaron?
I encouraged Charlie's encouragement that it seems as though there's a formula for calculating what % growth can be attributed to replacement truck vehicles or truck expenses, and that James was reminding me that I can't say I actually remembered that the heavy apparatus are 100% eligible for impact fees, and if whatever assistance we can give to that, which is probably none, to that state conversation around amending the use of the police impact fees, that would make this 10-year plan a really workable conversation. But I want to thank you for coming up with this. And this is exactly what we asked you to do last year when we looked at the fleet budget, and I'm grateful to have real numbers in front of us, as difficult as it may be. Thanks.
Anybody else? Lisa, did you have any follow-up? You said you were encouraged. Tell me why you're encouraged.
Well, I think for the same reasons that Councilmember Mendenhall is stating, I think that we have a real grasp on the entirety of the problem, and I think that we have, some concept of how to dig ourselves out of this. Of course, we're always dependent upon the general fund to support this initiative, and that means that we will span multiple years, which means we will span multiple council members, and we're always susceptible to the changes that occur when those changes inevitably happen. And so the support for a 10-year plan is always difficult, but I think, for the reasons that Councilmember Mendenhall is stating, you don't know how to fix a problem until you know what the problem is, and so that's where my encouragement comes from, and I think we have the right guy in charge to kind of lead us out of it.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate your comments. The only way you can implement a 10-year plan is to first have a 10-year plan, so I appreciate the 10-year plan. So,
Mr. Chair,
thank you. Yes.
I have a question for Cindy around not binding future councils, but binding future councils. How has the council historically approached such long-term investment plans? And if we say yes to this, what's the best way for us to ensure a commitment to it in years 6 and 7 and 8, when it's probably feeling a lot better and making less sense why we could continue the commitment?
There's probably not a simple way, which is why it hasn't been done, but the tools that come to mind, one is the financing program that the city currently uses. You can make that more formal in your budget appropriation. You can refer to that, or so almost using it like you're committing money toward bonding in a sense, but you're committing it toward financing. You could do that maybe. The attorney's office and finance would have to help us. And then one thing that has been done with public utilities, and again, it's a different animal, but the council has passed an ordinance laying out what the expectation is in terms of fees and appropriations in the coming years. And that can easily be undone by a future council, but it's a very solid record of what the plan was, why, and it typically hasn't been undone by subsequent councils. So those are a few things we can look for something better.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is proposed 911 Communications Bureau budget. Ben is our staff lead on this, and so Ben, I'll ask you to kind of introduce the topic. Scott Freitag's joining us. Thank you, Scott. And if you're bringing anybody else up, could you please introduce them?
I thought I was bringing some more people up. Danny Schoenfeld is our finance person. He does both fire and 911.
He only got part way. He as soon as he saw an open seat in the front row, he grabbed it, and so thank you for introducing him. Ben, can you lead us off on this?
Just a few quick highlights. The budget for 911 Communications Bureau is proposing to add 3 new FTEs. These are new office techs that would be answering non-emergent calls, which would free up time for 911 callers to answer the 911 calls. The council might remember adding 10 dispatcher FTEs about a year ago, and you'll see in the report that that's had a significant impact in the answer rate as well as a reduction in the mandatory overtime for the Bureau. And then there's a increase for salary changes of almost $100,000 related to the mayor's proposed compensation plan. And if the council hasn't taken a look, you might want to see the attachment to the staff report. It provides a breakdown of the answer times by hour of the day and number of seconds to answer for all 911 calls last year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Ben. Scott?
Good afternoon, council. I really appreciate Ben and the work that he does. I made a little joke, but I think it was very true that he may know the Bureau as well or better than I do, and the way he put his report together. Dang it. So, as Ben mentioned, we deal in seconds. So the business of 911 is really about customer service and how quickly can we answer the phone and quickly can we get help to respond. And during that time, our trained professionals are providing life-saving advice to people that call, like CPR, or how to control bleeding, or how to deliver a baby, those sorts of things. Our call volume, as you've seen by the charts, has continued to grow. The last 2 years, it's flattened a bit, but where we see the increase each year is not necessarily in the 911 calls, but in the non-emergency calls. So people are encouraged to call into dispatch when they see something. I think that's been a goal of many of the city council members when they're out in their community councils talking about, if you see it, call it in. And so that typically comes in on the 799-3000 number, the non-emergency number. Those phone calls are answered by 911 dispatchers. And so what we're asking for this year is some additional staff to only answer the 799-3000. So they'll be trained to be able to handle those types of calls. But what we would like them to do is not only take some of the burden away from the 911 call takers, but to be able to spend a little bit more time on the call with the callers. When they're calling in with something that's not a true emergency, but may need some time to be dealt with, maybe it's an ongoing problem in a neighborhood, on a non-emergency basis to help get them routed to the right services, rather than just getting the information and sort of doing the conveyor belt thing, just trying to get them off and into a queue somewhere for a response, but actually provide better service for the callers that are calling in that may not necessarily need an immediate response or even any response from police or fire, but they need to be directed to the right place in order to get their services taken care of. As you can see with that increasing call volume, the 10 dispatchers that you did approve last year was enormously helpful in helping us try and meet the standards of response times. But when you look at that chart, there are still times within the day where we're below the 90%. And that 90% is where we would like to be, where we're answering those calls in less than 10 seconds. Anyone knows when they call in during an emergency time that every single second counts and every single second seems to be minutes in your own mind. And anytime we can shorten that amount of time, it's better for those that are calling in. So I think we've been pretty remarkable with the staff that we have. They not only are very good at what they do, but they try and be as quick at what they're doing as well. But imagine yourself sitting in a position answering hundreds of calls during your particular shift, everything from an absolute true emergency to those that aren't true emergencies. And so for us, it's easy math. the number of people you have to answer the number of calls that come in. The ratio tells us that we're probably still not where we need to be. But what we're asking for in this budget is a little different than what we've done in the past, and that is to address the 799-3000 and free up some of the time for those 911 dispatchers to be quicker in answering those 911 calls. One of the questions that was asked was what changed in the legislature this year. The legislature wisely has addressed the issue of 911 funding. Within Salt Lake City, less than half of our funding comes from the 911 fee that we pay on our phone bills. The majority of it comes from general fund. There are a number of large jurisdictions that is the case. In the past, the distribution of those 911 funds was based on where the phone bill lived. So if you live in South Jordan, but you come to Salt Lake City and dial 911 here, all that money still goes to South Jordan. Beginning in July, the money goes to where the call happens, which is huge for us as the capital city with a big influx of individuals. So we worked very hard with our legislators this past year to identify how to change the distribution of those funds. Now there will be some negative impacts on some smaller jurisdictions around the state. So the state has put in a 2-year hold harmless clause to the rule, which means that they won't lose any money for the next couple of years as they look at how this adjustment occurs. But Salt Lake City does see an increase, and we've budgeted about $450,000 of new revenue for 911.
Scott, are you aware if that hold harmless is, that gap is being filled by the state and state funding, or is that money that under the formula would come to other municipalities, but it's going to be withheld and stay in those smaller communities for 2 years?
The second. So what they'll do is they take the full pot of money.
I don't know why that doesn't surprise me from the state, but
No,
that doesn't surprise me.
But they also did increase the actual rate. So again, Salt Lake City, what we're proposing is a $450,000 increase, and that may continue to climb over time as they deal with the hold harmless issue.
Questions, comments?
Yes, please. Scott, it talks about the 25% increase from May 16 to April 17 in call volume, and that is attributed to cell phone use. I'm assuming that if you've got a phone in your hand, you're more likely to call and report something, and that's what it's talking about.
Right.
So my question is, are those numbers similar across the country?
Absolutely. So overwhelmingly, the number of cell phone calls that come into a dispatch center versus landline is about 80% to 20%. Many homes don't have landlines anymore, but they have multiple cell phones. So if there's a traffic accident right out here at this intersection, we'll receive 10 phone calls for one incident. And there will be a plateau. It will get to a point where the market's saturated with the cell phones. But we've still seen this increase, particularly the last couple of years where cell phone providers have been competing to increase the number of phone lines within a family or within an organization or a business to deal with costs. So the last couple of years we've seen just an absolute number of increase in calls for the same incidents. But I think we'll get to a point where that sort of levels off because everybody will have a phone.
It seems, this seems late to me. It seems like the increase in cell phone usage happened years ago and not just in the last year. So I'm fascinated by a 25% increase in the last year. Did we see that year over year from 15 to 16?
We didn't. We saw, what we saw was the 4 main carriers over the last 18 months aggressively sell multiple phone packages rather than one cell phone. So what they would say is add 4 lines for $100 a month, and that was less expensive than what they would do in the past. And so now you and your husband and your kids and everybody has a phone now, and that's cheaper. So I think that was a product of their marketing over the last 18 months. that's not the same as it is today. It could come back, I suppose, but everyone I know has a cell phone. So it's when I say I think we've about hit that saturation level.
So my next question is in the next point under optimal staffing around a report looking at industry standards and indicating that we should have 85 dispatchers when we have 76 funded dispatchers. At what point do we grow to accommodate the reality and growth of calls that we're dealing with? And what's being proposed is a growth of sorts, but not actually at the industry standard. So, or not even quite close to it. You can't, maybe you can't answer that.
I can try. I think it's a function of revenue and what's available to pay for the resources that we need. I have some level of confidence that what the revenue coming in from the new 911 fees is going to be greater than what we've proposed, but I really want to see a few months of collections and how the state's going to distribute that, and I have no experience with that now until July hits. And so what I may do is over the next several months keep you up to date of what the revenue actually is, and then maybe come back sometime during this next year and talk to you about if the revenue does increase, additional resources that we can pay for.
Could we put that on the calendar for around the new year, or perhaps before that, after you've had several months of actuals from that increase, that we could request Director Freitag come back and talk to us about potentially addressing the FTE need through the increased revenue?
Yeah, I believe so. We could probably put it in our director's reporting schedule. So,
Great. Thank you.
if you'll capture that, Ben. Other questions or comments? Charlie?
Sure. Director Freitag, thank you very much for the information in this report. It is fascinating, as you can expect. As a council, we hear a lot about dispatch, and some of it's really good and some of it's not. And I think that the information that you've provided helps to clarify some of that. I mean, your dispatchers have a very, very difficult job because when you're talking to somebody in an emergency or even a non-emergency situation, people are only going to call if they are upset or if they are concerned about something. And so even, a few seconds may, to your point that you made earlier, seem like a long period of time. One of the things that I'd be really interested in seeing, and in light of with the 3 new positions that we may be funding, but also with the revenue that's going to be coming in, I know that you track, you and your staff track a lot of the information and self-audit and things like that, and I think that's really good. One thing that I think would be very interesting for us as a council and as a city would be to have an outside audit of that process as it moves forward. And in our council office, I know that we work with a couple of different auditing firms, and we do this regularly. That may be something that I think would help us give our constituents peace of mind that things are matching. Not that I'm doubting the numbers that you're putting out, because I'm not. I just think that sometimes when you deal with something as volatile as emergency calls, emergency response, sometimes it's good to have that outside perspective, and especially if we're having a great deal of new revenue coming in, it's good to kind of have an outside perspective. So a question that I have for our executive director is, with the information or the contracts that we have right now for outside auditing firms, is this something, a similar audit of calls and resources, is that something that can be handled within the contracts that we have?
Yes, 2 of the 3 firms that we have on prior approval. They've already been through the RFP process, so it helps us to expedite that. But 2 of the 3 firms would easily have the resources and expertise to perform an audit of this nature if the council were interested. The 3rd firm is probably, this probably wouldn't be their focus area. The council established this program to allow things to proceed more quickly. So we vet the firms through an initial RFP process, and that way they're available to the council at any time. We typically would write to all 3 firms and invite them to submit a proposal, and that also would include the mayor's office and whomever they designate as part of the group that reviews the scope and that type of a thing. So there would be continual involvement, as there was with the building services audit, if the council decided to go in that direction.
Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate that clarification. With that information, Mr. Chair, I would like to propose a straw poll that we direct staff to work with Director Freitag and the administration to move forward with an independent audit through the council office.
Okay, any questions about that direction?
Yeah, if you just clarify again, sort of for the public, what's bringing this forward and help us out.
Sorry?
What's the impetus behind the audit very clearly?
Well, I think a lot of it is just is for, you know, a point of clarification, because, you know, when I'm at community council meetings, I'm hearing that, you know, the response time is, or that the call time is much different from what we see here. I don't doubt that what we're seeing here, but I think when, you know, we go to our constituents and say, well, you know, there's been a self-audit and these are the numbers that have come back, it sometimes is a little bit more difficult for the public to accept that when they have a very different perception from their experience. And so I think part of it is to help us with our constituents, just so that they can understand that there is a broader audit, that we have had multiple eyes looking at this. But I also think that with the increase in revenue that's going to be going to dispatch, that it'll also be good to have that. And I think that it helps Director Freitag and his staff as well, just to have those outside eyes looking in on this, to ensure that, you know, the numbers that we're seeing are accurate, and so that we can go back out and confidently express that to our constituents.
Thank you.
Cindy?
Another quick piece to answer Councilmember Johnston's question is that several years ago, the workload was increased significantly by bringing Sandy in on contract. And at that time, there was not an increase in staffing that balanced with that. And so even the last time that the council added staff members, I don't think it was at the same level that some of the just professional formulas would suggest. However, those are just guidelines, and it may be that our dispatch has been able to entirely absorb that and everything is fine. We do still get complaints when people are kind of in that outlier area where they get bumped into a kind of a loop, and of course, they're very upset at that point. So that was why we first started talking about the audit idea. And I think council members are still receiving some of those. So.
I also think it would be helpful. I think it's changed dramatically and improved. I mean, when I say changed, I mean improved. But one of the things I think would be beneficial for us, and an audit could help identify, is are we keeping up with our demand, and what will it take going forward to meet that demand? And I don't think we've really had that with the modification to the state funding. Throwing that into the analysis, I think, could be really helpful to see how is that going to help us, cover us? Is it still short? What's that look like going forward? So
correct. And with the, you know, with Director Freitag's request for 3 additional staff members, we may find that that is still, you know, very, very conservative, and we may want to look at expanding.
Any other questions? We're going to do a straw poll. Charlie, do you want to restate your straw poll?
Yes, the straw poll would be, do we support council staff, or giving council staff direction to work within the auditing scope that we have, to work with Director Freitag and the mayor's office to complete an audit of dispatch.
Any questions? All those in favor, thumbs up. Looks like we're unanimous. Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions for Scott or for Ben? Thank you very much for your
Mr.
presentation.
Chair, mine would just be, as soon as we see that switch with the county, I know you're going to implement the 911 dispatch in 2018. I'd like to hear a lot more about that and how that's going to be implemented, make sure that we don't have a lower service going forward and making sure that happens.
Okay.
Thank you. If you're following our agenda, riveted like I know you are, you'll notice that we're running behind time. And I just, even though this is still ahead on our agenda, I just wanted to call to your attention that we've had a change. And the change is to item number 5, proposed golf enterprise fund budget. In conversations, the chair and I in conversations with staff and looping in the administration, we realized that there are some pretty significant policy conversations that are a part of the budget proposal this year for golf, and we wanted to be sure to really give them sufficient dedicated time to vet some of those ideas and those policies. And so what we're proposing to do is to continue through the budget cycle with Rose Park in the golf fund, but we're putting that fund balance difference in unresolved issues. So the staff is working on what that dollar amount would be, and then deliberately schedule with the administration some very more intensive conversations about golf and community golf and some of those proposals. I think there's just too much interest in the community about what that might look like and how that might work, and I think it's important for us to give that sufficient policy discussion time. So we are not going to be having a golf enterprise fund budget today. It will come up as part of the general fund subsidy in our unresolved issues going forward. So we are on item, where are we? 3, which is a proposed economic development budget. And we'll be looking for Allison, Sylvia, Laura Freitag, and Ben. And so, Allison or Sylvia, who's?
I can introduce it.
Could you introduce it? Great. And then we'll turn the time over to Laura.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Department of Economic Development has a number of components, as you know, the Arts Council, the Business Support Division, hope I'm not massacring that name, and the RDA as well under the arrangement that the council is familiar with. The Department of Economic Development itself, that is apart from RDA, will have a budget proposed to reach $1.561 million in FY18, which is a 35% increase over FY17. That's mostly due to making permanent some changes that were made in Budget Amendment 2 last year, including just one position, a manager of small and minority businesses, and continuing initiatives for strategic plan creation, improved marketing for the city, and some other budget enhancements. There is also a proposal in economic development to hire a new workforce development manager. And then the other part of economic development, the Arts Council, is slated for a 4.9% increase for FY18, which would reach $525,000 and change. And that is in addition to the non-departmental budget amount for the Arts Council, which is $560,000. So we can continue, or if you'd like to have Director Fritz begin her presentation.
Let's go to Director Fritz. Thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like you have some slides.
I have a few slides. I promise I'm going to go through them very quickly. As a new department, we thought it was really important to have a very defined mission and vision. I'm not going to read that to you, but I'll let you enjoy that at your leisure. One of the big things in our work plan last year, as you may remember, was to do a survey of our business community. We had over 900 respondents to the electronic survey, and we're currently out visiting with over 100 businesses to make sure that the information we're getting in that survey is accurate. And the top 3 things that we heard consistently, both through the electronic survey and the business site visits, were really 3 things. One was workforce development. We have a wonderful problem in Salt Lake City that we have an unemployment rate that runs around 3%. The drawback is we have an unemployment rate that runs around 3% and a very robust economy. So we have to be really mindful of how do we enhance the workforce development efforts, and it's something that we heard time and again from our business community. We also heard that working with our local level businesses, what we call the street level business, the retailers, the restaurants, was still really important. And as you know, one of the initiatives that we started last fiscal year was the Main Street America. And so we really want to make sure we're continuing to build that program out. And then last but not least was marketing. And you'll see a number of reasons why we think marketing is really going to be an important effort for us. So starting on the more in depth into each one of these. From workforce development, our business survey highlighted this need for this position. We heard it time and again. And what we hear a lot from our companies is we have positions to fill, we don't know how to fill them, we don't know how to get to the resources. A lot of the workforce development organizations around the region really focus on the employee and not the employer. And so we feel like we can be that role for the employer. And then, we're also hearing that we're competing for talent. And so helping companies understand, again, where they find that pipeline of talent was going to be really important. And then we want to make sure that there's all these great programs out there, but let's make sure that we're helping to educate our employers about what they are and how they can tap into them. And again, we see this as really not only an effort for our recruitment, but also for our retention of our companies, making sure that they have a skilled workforce ready and available. Any questions on workforce?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Do you have anything specifically that you're doing with our universities to help with that, to be the pipeline with the U and Westminster and Newmont and LDS Business College? Do we have an active role with them?
That's a great question, and it's something that we're building because obviously the survey has been just done within the last quarter. But one of the things that we are doing is I serve on the Workforce and Economic Development Advisory Board, that's a mouthful, for Salt Lake Community College. And it's a great way for us to understand and help share with the community college the needs that we're hearing from the business community. We want this new position to help reach out and make those same connections with other organizations that provide education training.
Great, thank you so much.
Mr. Chair, may I jump in? Congratulations, this is awesome. And if I followed through on what I said I would do when we did advice and consent with you, I sent you a Harvard Business School case study it's called Bridging the Gap. And it examined this lack of connectivity which cities should fill, in their opinion, between employers and employee training programs in the area. And I'm going to send it to you again.
Please do.
I just pulled it up, and I think I brought it up when we did that meeting a long time ago now. But you are filling that need in a way that is in need around the country. And I don't know if you meant to do it, but this is what I was hoping you would do. Thank you so much. Our whole city will benefit from this. Our educational institutions will benefit. Our lower wage workers will be able to have greater mobility, and our businesses will be strengthened by a stronger workforce. This is fabulous. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments or questions?
So for Main Street America, we're very excited that we are the first city in the state to receive not one, but 2 Main Street America designations. I don't know how they talked me into that. But the Granary District and State Street are the 2 project areas that Main Street America fell in love with. And part of the reason why was because of the RDA tools. So, one of the things that we really pride ourselves on in the department is how we've aligned the resources. And this is another great example of how we're aligning the RDA resources with Main Street America to really revitalize these wonderful commercial areas and build upon the successes we've already seen today. Next up, we think that the designations are part of that whole cultivating vibrancy that you hear throughout our work plan, but not only from enhancing arts and commercial districts, but also from the housing opportunities end. And we think that there's an opportunity, again, looking at how do we maximize the dollars that have been allocated within the RDA budget to apply it to these project areas to enhance the work that we're doing. And then good news, this is the budget amendment from last fiscal year would be a carryover to go towards this effort.
Can you remind us what that amount is?
The total amount was 159,000, and 30,000 of that was dedicated to the Main Street program. Oh, sorry, 159,000, 30,000 of which was dedicated to the Main Street program.
And that 30,000 will be shared between the 2 designated areas?
Correct.
Will you explain a little bit more? I was asked today, is this a grant? What is this? What does the designation mean? And what is the financial benefit for Main Street America to participate with us?
Sure. So Main Street America was started by the National Trust of Historic Preservation to revitalize downtowns. And what they found is that it also works in commercial districts. And it's a methodology that what we're getting from Main Street America is the work plan. How can we create a sense of place within these commercial districts? How do we build upon the business mix? How do we make sure that these areas are clean, safe, and green? And then most importantly, how do we share the messaging for these commercial districts? And I always like to use 9th and 9th, which sort of happened organically, but is really a great example of commercial revitalization. It has a sense of place. It has a good business mix. It feels pretty safe and clean and pretty green. And then most importantly, it has sort of a brand. And so we want to be able to do this in our other commercial districts that maybe are a little bit more challenged. And so that's where Main Street America is going to help us create that work plan, create that strategy that will allow us to implement it, and then bring in experts from the National Main Street Program to help us make sure that we're moving the needle on those items in the work plan.
So this would inform, I'm assuming, our RDA State Street project plan?
Absolutely.
The way that maybe a small area plan would inform our investments in a master plan context, or?
A little bit, only rather than looking at land use, this is going to look at business mix and vitality.
Yeah, okay. It'll be interesting to see. Thank you.
Definitely. Last but not least, marketing was the third big item that we wanted to focus on. And again, this really came out of our business survey. It highlighted for us a lack of awareness of the department. No big surprise, we're a year old. But kudos to our team who's been out there, not only getting us on television on a weekly basis, but also out meeting with businesses to make the awareness a little bit more upfront, but also of the city resources, which was a little surprising to us. And so we think that there's some work to be done there. The other thing that our survey showed is that we have a small problem with the Net Promoter Score. What a Net Promoter Score is we asked our businesses, are you promoting Salt Lake City? Are you detracting from Salt Lake City? Or are you just not really talking about it? And what we found is they're kind of detractors for the city, which is not good. So for us, anything above a 0 would have been a good score. Our score was -25. Obviously not ideal. So we know that marketing and helping to inform our business community about the great things that we're doing as a city is going to be mission critical.
Mr. Chair, give us an example of what those negatives would be that are out there? I mean, we know our liquor laws are always high on that list, but besides that, I mean, because we see Lehigh promoting all the great things in Salt Lake City to get people to go there, even though we have all the cool things in Salt Lake. But they use our pluses for them. So what are our negatives that, I mean, we've seen all the ads that are going on in Idaho and Nevada and Wyoming of why you don't want to come here, and we can't do a lot about the legislature, but can you give me some examples of what we can do and what they are, what the negatives are, and do we have any ways to combat those?
So the three things really kind of go back to why we laid out the work plan for the year the way we did. The first one being the workforce issue. You know, we can't find talent. We don't think we can fill our jobs. That was a little concerning to us because we know that there's programs out there. So then it became an education issue, which is why our marketing became a really big, important priority for us. And then last but not least, we heard time and again, especially for a really small business who's looking to start a storefront, understanding the process felt overwhelming. For a large developer who does it every day, maybe not as overwhelming. So we really needed to make sure that we had that position in place to help our local businesses succeed in getting through a process within the city, understand the resources that are available, and helping to bring those resources to the business community. And so those are really the big three things that we aligned our budget with for fiscal year 18. And then last but not least, again, this is a budget amendment carryover that will go toward this effort. So successes, thought it would be important to sort of build off of my 6-month check-in. You can see that we've had 4 more wins since the 6-month check-in in March. And what we found is that these companies are bringing some sizable job numbers as well as capital investment to our community. So the most important numbers, I think, are as of today, and we know that hopefully we'll have one more announcement yet before the end of the fiscal year. But as of today, our totals for fiscal year 2017 are over almost 3,000 new jobs, and those are stated by the company. So the company gives us the job creation numbers. We also are seeing over 2.5 million square feet either built or leased in our community, with over $346 million of capital expenditure. So we think from an economic development standpoint, we've had a pretty good first year. And it's because our team works their guts out. So.
It happened while you were here, so you get to take credit for all of it.
Well,
Yeah.
Director Fritz, may I request that it would be nice to see year over year,
Sure.
or how it compares to national average of mid-city size or something like that. Those are fabulous numbers. I'm not trying to downplay them, but it's nice to know. Thanks for coffee, so I can stay awake. That would be really interesting information. If you have any links like that, I would appreciate it.
We'll see what we can find.
Thank you.
Last but not least, the Arts Council. So there's no changes to the budget for fiscal.
I just want to let you know, Laura, you've said last but not least twice now.
Have I?
Yeah,
Sorry.
maybe 3 times. So
You make me nervous, Dan.
I've caught your strategy here.
Perfect. I'm just trying to keep you, moving along. So no changes to the budget for fiscal year 2018. We're currently working on a strategic plan with the Arts Council Foundation Board to clearly establish the mission, goals, objectives, and tactics for programming specifically. I know that there was some questions about Twilight last year, and I want to make sure that you understand that there's some measures that I've put into place to help reduce the risk of running a deficit. I'm not going to read those to you, let you read those at your leisure, but it was really important to me that we had some very specific goals and objectives to assure that there is not a program that runs a deficit within the Arts Council. And then last but not least, we had a GRAMA request, and the GRAMA request unearthed a new House bill that was adopted over the summer which is HB 55. And this is definitely going to affect the financial relationship between the city and the Arts Council Foundation Board. So at this time, we're not prepared to give you a lot of answers on it because we just found out about it. However, we are going to be working closely with the Arts Council Foundation Board, our legal counsel, our financial department, to make sure that we are providing you some pros and cons of what that relationship could look like.
So, Director Fritz, you mentioned Twilight. When we'd had conversations last winter about this year's Twilight series, I think one of the things you committed to was a follow-up at the end of the season with us about your measurables. It sounds like you've put in place, but sort of next steps in a true evaluation of the future of the program, and where are you in that cycle?
We are in the process right now of working with the Foundation and the Arts Council on getting a model for Twilight for FY19. So we're going through that process right now, and we plan on having a presentation for you in the first quarter.
So one of the things we talked about, and I'm not trying to hold you to this, I'm just reminding myself, is that we talked about whether or not that was a program we wanted to continue or spin off. Does your model assume that it's going to continue, or does your model look at a variety of options?
I think everything's on the table
Okay.
right now.
Okay, thank you.
But for me, it was really important, Council Chairman, that we had those goals and objectives of what the Arts Council is and should be doing, and then aligning the programming value to those goals and objectives.
Sure,
So that's why we're doing the strategic plan.
I appreciate that, thank you. Other comments or questions? Aaron?
Yes, please. I understand that we're delaying this discussion a bit, but that's first bullet point under the third bullet point, that no program can run a deficit, seems contrary to the very nature of Twilight. And I don't, that is what it is. I mean, we do that in government and in our enterprise funds, where some golf courses fund other golf courses, and that's, I'm not trying to bring golf into this, but I'm just saying that that's a reality that we accept in many different ways. And that seems to be the reality of Twilight in the context of the Arts Council. So how can you prevent that? I mean, that is what Twilight is. So how can we not expect to run a deficit in that individual program?
And may I expand that a little bit? Because I'm a pretty strong advocate that arts programs should be subsidized. And I know there's a difference between running a deficit and running a subsidy, so, but I'd like to have you
I
respond to
appreciate that.
Councilmember Mendenhall and how you're thinking about that.
The way that I was thinking about that is directly to your point, Council Chairman, that you're right, there are different funding sources for Twilight beyond the city, but my goal was to assure that we were not coming back to ask for additional funding because of a deficit on the program. And so I've challenged the Arts Council Foundation Board and the staff to assure that we come in on the budget that we've set forth, that would not require us to come back and ask for additional funding, which has been sort of the traditional model, where we run a deficit, we come and ask for more money, we run a deficit, we run more money. And so we're trying to get out of that cycle of asking for backfilling of Twilight.
So is it accurate to suggest that you may have a proposal that requires city funding, but you're anticipating that's a solid request in the budget, and that you don't overrun that proposed budget, which has been the pattern in the past, is being unrealistic about the budget and the allocation, then coming and backfilling that in?
Correct.
Is that so? Tell me that you're okay with the concept of subsidizing art programs, because I guess that's where I'm getting a little nervous.
So Twilight gets funded in a number of different ways. There's that funding, there's city funding, there's tickets revenue, beer revenue. So there's a number of different ways that we fund that program. However, when there's a deficit that runs within the program, we always come back to the city to ask for that additional subsidy. And the goal is not to operate outside of the revenues that are set forth in the budget.
Okay.
And if I can chime
Does
in
that
on
help
this as
you
well.
with your question?
Just making me want to compare the request of this year to historic allocations when we look at all of our budget amendment allocations over the course of the year, in addition to the general budget. So I'm flipping through.
Cindy?
It's a little bit tricky because it's hard to get to apples and apples. Even apples and oranges, it's hard to get to, because there was different funding mixed in. So I think what you guys did when you last appropriated, and Laura can correct me, but it felt like what you were doing is like a reset. you got them caught up and out of the problem they were in. And so last week we were talking about a number of things in the Public Services Department where they went ahead and spent the money and then wanted you to reimburse them after they had made the policy decisions. And so this is the same thing, I think, where I think Laura's saying to them, budget requests come up front, not after you've made the policy decisions. So I think that's the spirit that you're doing it, and it only works because it only has a chance to work because of the big reset that the council did by biting the bullet and giving them the money to catch them up.
What we
So when
did,
I see the
Think.
25,000 increase for FY 17-18 over 16-17, that may be realistic because of the catch-up that we did.
right. So what we did is we backfilled and we gave them money going forward too. So we did both of those things when we did those budget amendments. We theoretically got them to basically a funding level where they could move forward with their programming without having to without the expectation of coming back to us in the back end for additional money. I think
And
that
as-
was my recollection of it, because
That was the
it was
intent at the
150 and then
time.
it was some additional funding for 100 something. Yeah, I can't remember the exact numbers, but
And as a private foundation, they have a lot of different opportunities, sponsorships and fundraising and their ticket sales. So if they are not doing all of that with several legs to the stool, then yes, they could have a problem, and none of us can predict that. If they do, it would be contrary to everything everyone has tried to do.
I'm good.
okay. Any other questions or comments? Any additional? You good? All right. Thank you very much for your time. Council members, I want to check in with you. Here's sort of what I'm thinking, but I'm trying to be flexible. We have 3 items left on our agenda. We have a follow-up discussion on sewer rates. We have capital improvement projects, and we also have unresolved issues. I would like to propose that we continue now. I know you've been sitting for a while, so this is why I want to check in. We continue now with sewer rate increase. We take an earlier dinner break, and then we come back to capital improvement and unresolved. My hope is that we're finished up about 7 o'clock tonight. Is that okay? Does that work with
You wanting to be on the rest home schedule for dinner? Is that
I know
correct?
it's the early senior supper discount for dinner tonight.
Perfect for the two
But
of
it's
us,
not
Dan.
4:30. I mean, we could have,
Okay.
if I'd really been serious about that, I would have said 4:30 was dinner, but it's not. I think there's some Jell-O. No, I'm kidding. I don't think there's Jell-O tonight. So if we're okay with that, let's move on to item number 6, which is a follow-up discussion on sewer rate increase. And looks like a whole bunch of people are coming up. Lehua is the staff contact on this. Laura's going to join us, Laura Briefer, and looks like maybe I'll let Laura introduce the staff she brings forward. I'll remind you, this is a follow-up conversation we're having because of a lot of questions that have come up from council members and community members around the proposal for the budget for the public utilities increases this year. So Lehua, could you kick us off and just sort of summarize where we are, and then
Sure.
thanks.
Yes, thank you. The council may remember that the public utilities budget for the coming fiscal year includes in the sewer fund a 30% rate increase for this year, followed by several years of also double-digit rate increases. And so there have been some questions that council members have raised and that the public has raised about the need for those rate increases and how the capital projects are scheduled and what those rate increases generate in terms of revenue and when they are needed. So the Department of Public Utilities, Laura and her staff have prepared a presentation to go over with the council. One of the things that they have provided in a short turnaround time are a few rate scenarios if the council wanted to consider what it would look like to not do a 30% increase this year. And just by way of kind of balancing all of the needs, I'll just raise that reducing at all the 30% rate increase this year would not mean that that rate increase is not needed later on in the next 5 years. There is a timeline and some certain projects that are urgent, either because of state and federal requirements or because of system replacements that are needed. And so delaying a rate increase or reducing the proposed rate increase this year would just delay that to future years. And where some of the public comments have been that the rate increase is steep or sudden, or creates too varied of a fluctuation for what they can plan for, reducing this year's rate increase would not necessarily solve that problem. It would just cause it to happen in a future year. So with that, I'll turn time over to Laura, if that's okay to go through their presentation.
Great,
Thank you, Laura. And it looks like you've got some slides to run through for us.
We do have some slides to try to illustrate the scenarios that we walked through over the last few days, as well as some information on the use of our impact fees. That was a question that came up too, and I thought that would be helpful
And
for
Laura,
council members.
Before you start your slides, could you talk a little bit about how we got here? I know you reviewed that earlier, but a little more information about what your process was that got us to this proposed budget increase this year.
So with respect to our process for this proposed budget increase, you know, a lot of this was looking at our capital needs. That's the primary driver for this. And the two significant capital needs in the sewer utility, the first being the rebuild of our wastewater treatment facility to meet nutrient requirements. Those are federal and state mandates by the year 2025. And just in that process, in terms of looking at the alternatives for meeting that capital need, we looked at about 21 different scenarios about the types of capital improvements that would be needed that could satisfy those requirements and set us up to have a facility that lasts us for another generation or two.
Wait, did you just say you looked at 21 different scenarios of ways to achieve the requirements?
Yes, so there were a number of drivers for that. We're trying to achieve those regulatory requirements while not sinking costs into a facility that would still have to be replaced in the future, and looking at other issues at the facilities, such as seismic issues, and just basically the alternatives to make a lasting investment.
Can I reflect that I know it's not this simple, but when I talk to residents about the requirements and the development of the prison in the Northwest Quadrant, that I think the way it comes across, and I think it's maybe just me, but perhaps some of you feel this way too, makes it sound like the new facility is actually a result of the load from the Northwest Quadrant, and that without that we wouldn't be building the new facility.
Yeah, that is not correct. So the new facility is the result of trying to meet the nutrient requirements by a set deadline. The proposal doesn't actually increase the capacity of the new facility, although sometime in the future the design would allow incremental capacity to be added on.
Thank you.
Sure.
Could you just record that and
This has been recorded, and we'll do that little meme. We'll just have a little meme that says that right there. Before we get into questions, I'd like Laura to just go through her slides, because some of those questions might be addressed in her slides, and then we'll have opportunity to follow up.
Great. So the first couple of slides are just a quick summary of our use of sewer impact fees. And how we're regulated in that use. So we are subject to the Sewer Impact Fee Act. And just to back up, this question came up because there was a thought that, is Public Utilities optimizing the use of its impact fees to help offset rate increases for development-related or capacity-related projects? And so we wanted to provide some information about how we use those impact fees. As you know, they are restricted for growth-related capital projects. For public utilities, our history has been that collected impact fees are applied within 2 years of collection. We have 6 years to spend it by law, but we usually apply those within 2 years. During the time span between 2008 and 2017, we collected $9 million in sewer impact fees and applied about 7.6 million of those. And we are waiting till the end of this fiscal year to decide on the application of the 2017 impact fees. Our most recent impact fee analysis was completed in 2009. We have a new impact fee analysis planned during our rate studies in 2017, and we're hoping that that captures some of these projects and assets that were not captured in the 2009 analysis. And there is an opportunity there that we could potentially collect more impact fees in the future, but that requires some public process and policy decisions, and so we didn't make an assumption in our scenarios that we would have more than we currently have now.
So, Laura, if I might ask you, you've got an analysis plan for this year, so I'm assuming it's starting anytime, probably after the budget.
Right.
When would you expect to have the results, and when might I imagine that we might see some recommended adjustments based on things like Northwest Quadrant and some of those additional capacity issues that might come up?
And that's a good question. We actually just had that conversation with our rate consultant, who is just coming on board now. And we want to have those results ready by the time we go into the next budget cycle.
So it would
So
show
this
up
fall.
next year as a budget recommendation.
Exactly.
And as you're looking at a rebuild of your facilities and you provide incremental opportunities for capacity expansion, it seems like most of that, or a significant amount of that capacity expansion, is going to be impact fee eligible.
That's right.
Okay, so that'll be directly related to the new capacity that's coming online from, for example, the Northwest Quadrant.
That's right.
Okay, all right, thanks.
This is just a graphical representation of what I described in terms of our spending and collection of impact fees. So the black bars are the fees collected, and the red bars are what we've applied to impact eligible projects. And you can see it ebbs and flows as we accrue the fees, and then we apply completed project costs to those. And again, that represents between 2008 and 2017 about 9 million in the sewer fund in collections and about 7.6 in expenditures. So we just went over this with respect to how we got here in terms of sewer rate increases, really over the next several years to meet some and build needed capital projects that have some time certain deadlines, the wastewater treatment facility, as well as some critical sewer collection lines to serve the airport, Northwest Quadrant, and downtown Salt Lake City. As we looked during our budget process, and again during these scenarios, we have some goals related to the revenue that we collect from rates, and in particular in light of all of these large capital projects, we are very sensitive to trying to minimize these steep, sudden sewer bill increases year to year during this project timeline. We also need to preserve the financial health of the department, so that takes into consideration our debt service. It takes into consideration our cash reserve ratio, and it's a lot of information. We provided you with our cash flow spreadsheets, which try to reflect that, and we can go through those if that's helpful too. And then we want to keep the sewer projects on schedule. In particular, the collection systems, some of them are at capacity right now, which means that we're limited in terms of new development in areas. And with the sewer treatment plant, the regulatory deadline is real. We could face civil penalties in the future should we not comply to that, and those could be quite steep. In addition to, wanting to steward our natural environment. In all, when we looked at scenarios for reducing the proposed 30% increase for fiscal year 2018, we found, as Lehua summarized, that without affecting these goals, we would see steeper increases as we go into the future, particularly in fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20. And we actually have a graph here that looks at the impact on ratepayers through these different scenarios. We looked at 6 scenarios. The no change scenario was our original budget proposal of a 30% rate increase this year, followed by additional rate increases through 2022. We looked at another scenario where we have a 30% rate increase this year, but we do not include betterments with respect to the Northwest Quadrant that were in our original budget, and we can talk more about how that came to be as well. Scenario 3, our rate change was 25% this year. Scenario 4, 20%. Scenario 5, 15%, and Scenario 6 was 10%.
Laura?
Yes.
Should I wait?
Go ahead. If it's about, yeah.
I just have to ask around the heat program that the state subsidizes and CAP administers, I believe, which is around residents accessing assistance for heat, right? And I know that that fund runs out of money before the winter season's even through every year and has to be refunded through the legislature. But in looking at residents who access that kind of assistance, is there did you contemplate a scenario that, let's say, looks like scenario 1, but allows for some assistance to certain demographics in our city that might look like a higher increase in the subsequent years in order to cover those subsidies?
So I have 2 answers to that question. I'll just zoom ahead on to my last slide regarding customer assistance programs. Currently, we have a Project Water Assist program that we partner with the Salvation Army. And that's sort of, there are some qualifications in order to tap into that program. But it can be obtained on a utility bill once within a 12-month period. And to qualify, the household must be 150% below the poverty line for gross monthly income and must also fall into one of 3 categories, and that's 60 years or older, disability, or having a child 1 year under. Currently, we distribute between $2,000 and $6,000 per month with Project Water Assist and have a fund balance there.
I didn't mean to have my mic on, sorry.
Okay. The other answer to that question, again, is through this rate study. We talked with our rate consultant about including a scope item related to affordability for our water utilities, and really taking a deep dive into what is the demographic of our community. So I think I mentioned before, the Environmental Protection Agency has a recommendation in terms of what affordability means for water and sewer rates as part of a median household income. And they recommend around 4 or 4.5% of median household income of a community. I'd like to understand a little bit better, though, what our community looks like in terms of income and whether that covers everyone in our community. And then with that, we can have a little bit more information to see if we need to change any of our customer assistance programming to meet needs.
Mr. Chair?
Sure, Lisa.
Can I just thank you for looking at every single way to slice this? You really have been, I think, incredibly responsive and responsible and recognizing the job that you have to do, but also being responsible to our residents, and I really, really appreciate that. I want to ask a question. If I'm being overly dramatic about this, then tell me. But it's my understanding that if we don't take care of this, and we were to have a failure of our sewer treatment plant, that pretty much the city would be out of business. Is that overstating it?
That could be an impact, yes, if our sewer treatment plant was not operable anymore. There are other areas in between, though, that could have really terrible impacts to our community and public health, and the environment.
I know we just had a sewage problem yesterday in Andrews District, which has been picked on unfairly of late. But and I know in my district a few years ago we had sewage backing up in houses, and I just feel like it's important for us to explain to people that with local government, it's supposed to be invisible, and everyone's happy with it when it's invisible because it's working. And then when it doesn't work, we really hear about it. And you guys do an amazing job of being invisible. But it's our job, I think, to go out and help our constituents understand why this is important, and not to try to terrify them, but to also explain why this is necessary and that we really have taken this seriously. And you particularly, your whole team, have looked at this and you're looking at a way to make it work. And I really appreciate looking at this assistance program and that we are looking for a way to do this. It's going to be painful no matter when we do it, is what it appears to me. And I just want to thank you for helping us to do what needs to be done, even if it's not fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Laura, did you have additional information you wanted to cover, or?
Well, we did have some other information about the sewer rate scenarios, kind of different ways of presenting it. I don't know if it is helpful or not, but looking at our different rate scenarios and what the ultimate impact is 5 years from today in terms of what the rates are, and then and that's these different scenarios here, looking out 5 years, and then monthly. What is the monthly impact to the average resident in each of these scenarios? And what this shows is these different starting points in fiscal year 2018 at the left side of the graph, and then you can see how some of them have just much larger, steeper rate increases than others, and what our goal has been is to try to smooth those out so that from year to year it's just not as sudden of an increase, but to accomplish the same ends.
Thank you. Andrew.
Yeah, so this is where my questions go, and I agree with what you said earlier, Lisa and everyone else. But all the 5 other scenarios all drop the overall revenue by 9.1 million. Is that intentional? What does that do for the overall project?
Yeah, so let me describe that a little bit. When we first put our budget together and presented it in April, the conversations with respect to the Northwest Quadrant and infrastructure had potential designs for a gravity-fed sewer system serving the prison, the concept being that the city would pay to increase the pipeline capacity to allow for future development, and that was the betterment. There has been some change during the process and in the design, and new information that has emerged in terms of some of the challenges in developing a gravity-fed system. And so the state is now looking at a force main system, and with that force main system would need to build a redundant 2 pipelines, if I'm correct, and so a redundant system that would have some capacity built into that for future development, but wouldn't be a betterment that the city would be responsible for. There's still some analysis that's going on, but I wouldn't have a betterment number at this point in the process because of the change of the design. If there was a betterment number that we had to consider.
That's not the 9.1 million difference, or is that?
That is the 9.1
concept?
million difference. That and that impacted. I think it was 2020 was when it was contemplated that the city would have to reimburse the state for that amount, and so that impacted some of those out years in a positive way.
So my other question is, what the graph you have up on the board, the slide right now, and if I read it correctly, is the scenario 1 the one that increases dramatically between 2021 and 2022? Is that accurate?
Yeah, that was scenario 1, and I believe that accounted for that betterment.
Okay.
And with scenario 1 and 2, they're coincident until 2022, and then you see number 1 shoot way up.
Right, because of the betterment.
You may not have the answer to this one, but what happens from 2023 to 2025?
We looked at that also, and as we start projecting further and further out, it's not quite as accurate as our 5-year period, because there could be other capital projects that arise based on condition or criticality. But out through 2025, we see rate increases, but they are incrementally smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And by 2025, when the treatment plant is completed, we see just the normal inflationary rate increase.
And
So
how far
go back.
how far out do we keep paying for this infrastructure upgrade? 20 years?
That's our
Yeah,
bond.
the simple answer is because of the bonding that we're doing, they're 20-year bonds, so we'll be paying the debt service for at least that point in time unless rates drop, and then maybe we can refund some of that and save some money. So,
Because the question always comes that we increase for a project, but it never comes back down, at least in our lifetimes. That's fairly accurate,
it's fairly accurate,
Yeah.
it is. It's our debt service going out to 2025 is double our operational costs. Well, I should say double our revenue, actually.
Mr. Chair. I have a few questions. And I'd like to go back to your comment around that you'd like to better understand that need in the city. And I was unaware, or I'd forgotten about the water assistance program. Do I understand right from that slide that you can access 1 month of assistance over the course of a year?
Right, yes, that's how I would interpret that. It's once within a 12-month period.
Because I'm interested, it sounds like there's a conversation with our housing and neighborhood development, probably, between public utilities and understanding our AMI breakout for our residents in the city. Have you had that conversation with them in this regard?
Not yet, but I would like them to be involved in our rate analysis and the affordability analysis, definitely.
I would too, and I'm particularly interested in easing the blow of this highest of the scenario 1 proposal with the 30% jump. If we could find a way to identify the population as best as we can with the assistance of hand that would be likely to access some assistance, and finding a way to build that assistance into the scenario for the future. And even if that means under scenario 1 that we go from 30 to 15%, 15%, 10%, 20%, perhaps it means that we go from 30 to 20% to 15% or something in order to build that directly into the funding. So I want to open that up to my peers. It sounds like we're not entirely asking public utilities to invent the wheel, because they are administering a subsidy program underwater. I didn't mean underwater, I meant within water.
It actually subsidizes all the utility bills, so if somebody has trouble paying their utility bill, it doesn't just obviously pay for water, it'll pay for their entire utility bill.
So I think I heard Laura saying, or this was my interpretation, so correct me if I'm wrong, that you expect to gather quite a bit more information about that population and the need in your rate surveys that you're doing this year.
That's right.
And it will be completed probably by the end of the year to be incorporated in next year's budget. So that scenario that Councilmember Mendenhall just suggested would be totally doable in that process.
Right, I think so, and I just want to clarify, I think we're calling it an affordability analysis to really tie affordability to water. And another item that came up with that as well is just also to make sure we're looking at it in the context of the other fees and charges that are also hitting our residents.
I guess my other question was around could you go back to in your slides and I'll tell you when to stop?
Mhm.
And then keep going past the graphs to the bullet points. Nope, keep going.
Let's see. This
Yeah,
one?
maybe so. Okay. Repair and rebuild critical sewer collection lines to serve the airport, Northwest Quadrant, and downtown Salt Lake City. I just have to bring up waste heat recovery and ask if there is any consideration of using that as a tool with those main lines.
I think that is something that we can look at. We are talking about so back in 2015, we completed a renewable energy plan for the department that didn't include some of the new infrastructure that we're contemplating. And we are now talking about adding on to that renewable energy plan. And waste heat recovery is a part of that.
Guys, I know it's not attractive, but
They
it
have all
actually
the right,
is attractive.
She's got all the right answers today, though. I find it very
I think I'm the only one pushing poop heat collection along from the council side, but and I realize this really isn't council, but the city of Seattle learned a lot of valuable lessons of what they wish they would have done in advance of that type of investment, and I hope that we're learning from them.
Yes.
Okay, that's all. Thanks.
Other questions?
Well, can you explain to me, if you're doing this affordability analysis and yet we would implement a budget that would go into effect July 1, wouldn't people would get the increase starting July 1? So if our goal is to minimize the blow, but we have to wait until the end of the year for that study, what do we do with that?
Well, we contemplated looking at the out years because there is that compounding effect as we go in the out years. When we looked at the different scenarios too, we saw that, and I could probably show this better on the graph, but if you looked at scenario 2, which is the 30% increase this year without the Northwest Quadrant betterment, so taking out that 9.1 million, and scenario 3, which is a lesser increase this year, a 25% increase, it lessens the impact, but I think it still gives us this smoother curve in terms of rate increases over time, and it allows us to take into consideration the affordability analysis that we're doing this year as well as the impact fee analysis.
Okay, thanks.
Two things for me. One, I think you're already doing, but I think it would be very worthwhile to track any increased requests for assistance in this process. I think that's going to be important. But my sense is, actually, since you adjust rates based on winter water use, does this even go into effect until next spring? Your 30%?
Kurt, do you know?
Well, for obviously the commercial users, some of it does, but
Okay.
And the
For
rate will
residential?
increase for flows, right?
Right.
But you're right, as far as the average winter water use, it will occur really next year once we get that
Okay.
average figured out. you know.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks. And I think one of the concerns that I have in part of the messaging, and I think I understand the rationale for looking at the big picture and impact fees and new growth, but it does. It's easy for me to see how people are looking at this and thinking, we're budgeting an increase based on new growth in the Northwest Quadrant because those projects connect. And I don't know to what extent you could separate those out, but the reality of the increase for the rebuild of the facility at its current capacity, I think is probably the best thing you said today, from my perspective of how to respond. But also I think we have to be really careful that we're sure that we're not asking our ratepayers to subsidize this increase in the Northwest Quadrant that's being driven primarily by the state and their facility going out there.
I could respond to that right now. So the collection system lines are not the timing is in response to the prison, but the projects are master plan projects that need to be accomplished. And even without the prison, we are already at capacity in some of those lines. And we are very challenged in terms of allowing new discharges and new businesses on those lines currently. We've had, especially during the rainy season, some times where we're actually right at capacity.
I want to agree with Stan, though. I think the reality is that the perception, though, isn't very clear for a lot of folks, and it's hard because we have to keep talking about, honestly, that this does include some infrastructure that's going to serve that area, but I haven't been as good as I hope I would have been about saying it's not about the increase for the prison. Right. It's about existing need that we're going to have for businesses and other things, and I think that's going to be an important piece going forward about how clearly we can clarify that and how consistently, because I think it's still very confused.
Yeah, I think that the timing's unfortunate that we're having these sort of simultaneous needs. Charlie?
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I think, just because, we have a lot of things that are master planned, right, that we're not funding. So I think we need to be careful about, completely walking away from the fact that some of the projects that we're talking about are tied directly to the Northwest Quadrant work that's being done, because the reality, I know we can say that it's not, but we could also say that it is, and we'd be equally right on both angles of it. And I think sometimes when we're trying to spin something, especially when we're trying to communicate with constituents, it's I would much rather err on the side of being overly in the light about what's being done and what some of the issues are, as even if it's unpopular, because let's face it, just because we're putting something in the Northwest Quadrant that happens to be in the master plan, I personally would not have prioritized that nearly to the level that we're now having to do it. So I think we're right and we're wrong in how we're doing this, but I don't know how else to get past it. But I would be I would caution us to be too clever about how we're communicating this, because the reality is a lot of stuff that we are seeing is related to that project. It may not, there are other things as well, but it's still related.
Laura, one final question from me. The airport's doing a massive expansion. Their volume and traffic's going up. They're certainly, I'm assuming their water and sewage usage is going up. Do we collect impact fees on that project? How's that incorporated into your plan?
Are we collecting?
We are. They've paid quite a bit of those impact fees already. We expect I think it's about 2 million gallon a day increase from that area, and that is part of the expansion and things that we're looking at as well. Yeah.
Charlie?
So, and I may have misheard, but it sounded earlier like you said that the capacity wasn't increasing, that the capacity is going to stay the same. But how can capacity stay the same when, to Stan's point, the airport is expanding? We're expecting additional discharge from that project. Right now, the northwest quadrant is empty. There is nothing out there. So whatever goes out there, there will be additional capacity that will be discharged into our system. So how is it that we're going to be able to take all of that waste in if we're not increasing capacity with this bond
So,
or with this levy?
Yeah, so there's two reasons. First of all, the current sewer treatment plant is a 56 million gallon per day treatment plant, and we do not collect that much. The proposed treatment plant is also 56 million gallons per day, and in terms of what we've modeled for the additional, influent from the airport and other development, that would serve our needs out into some point in the future where we'll probably have to incrementally expand that treatment plant. But we didn't think it was wise to do it right away, again, to minimize the impact to the community. The other piece is conservation. Water conservation has also played a role in terms of what we see at the wastewater treatment facility.
Yeah. How far in the future are we thinking? I mean, according to the models that you're using, with the prison, with the northwest quadrant expansion, with the airport expansion, I mean, are we talking 20 years out, 5 years out?
I don't remember, but we do have that information in our sewer treatment master plan. Maybe
it's at least 20 years out. And what we're doing is we're designing the new plant so that we can add on to it easily without having to do a major new construction project, but design such that we can stub onto it.
So it wouldn't be a rebuild, it would be an addition.
That's right. So actually there's a master plan design that contemplates projects that we aren't going to be building in 2025, but we may need in the future so that we don't have to add something on that's awkward to the plant.
Great, but you're thinking even for that next phase, we're 20 years out.
Yes.
Based on the models that we're using.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
One more question, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Andrew.
Back to the rate scenarios. The difference between 1 and 2 looks like in year 5, it drops from a 20% to an 8% increase. And that reflects potentially not needing the 9.1 million in addition, that we don't know if we're going to need yet or not. Is that accurate?
So that difference between 1 and 2 is that 9.1 million betterment.
On the last year.
On that last year, yes.
And the other ones just space it out differently. So rate 4 as an even 2020, 2016, 4. What's the difference if, for the project itself, if you drop from a 30 to a 20 the first year, and say do this scenario 4, we have 4 much more even sort of increase?
I think with scenario 4, we're basically pushing the larger rate increases out into the future, even though it's the same percentage.
Mm-hmm.
There's a compounding element so that there is a larger actual bill that people will see incrementally. And the other difference is that, it puts us a little bit at risk to delay those rate increases in terms of the project schedule and bonding and bond rating. So there are maybe benefits in delaying that, but there are also some risk to that.
Okay, so scenario 1 is still the preferred option.
I would say scenario 2 without the 9.1 million.
Okay.
Definitely want to take that out.
Yeah.
Okay. Laura and company, thank you very much for your time and your follow-up on this. It's been incredibly helpful, so we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council members, let's take our dinner break now. If we could come back at about 5 to 6, then we have our CIP discussion and unresolved issues discussion, and it's still my hope that we can be completed right at or around 7 o'clock. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Poonam Kumar with SLC TV, and you're watching Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm inside the Public Safety Building, which is the first net zero public safety building in the country. And it also houses our police, fire, and 911 communications. For this week's episode, we'll talk to Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown, and our History Minute is about the Rose Park sludge pit. Let's start off with our legislative update and look back.
Salt Lake City is ready to talk business. Salt Lake City's Department of Economic Development is focused on making our city a place for everyone. It's our job to help create jobs, advance career development, and improve the quality of life in our city.
And whereas Salt Lake City has recognized the pivotal importance of a robust and diverse economic development model by elevating the department to a cabinet-level status.
It's open space, so
Congratulations.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. There is no higher calling. There is no greater sacrifice.
These officers served with great integrity and character. We honor them this day as we will do each year. We commit to remember them, and we will never, never forget them.
The mural that is behind me here, we've done 156 heads of different women who we are calling catalysts for change. They made a difference in the arts, in sciences, and in social evolution.
This exhibit not only shows me that women still need more equality, but it shows me how lots of women have overcome such inequality and they've had such trials.
Ellen! I am the first female gay mayor, and I certainly was the first openly gay elected official back in the 90s. I should be creating a foundation in this city that desegregates our city, that brings us together, that helps us understand one another, that helps us understand that we are one. We are all part of the human family.
I just think overall that it's really educational for everybody, especially students in high school. I think we all need to learn a little bit more about equality and about our government.
As young students, you have the opportunity to not only reflect on what you have learned today, but to take action in a way that can help us shape your entire generation.
For this week's interview, we'll hear from Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown about the Community Connection Center substation in the Rio Grande area.
Historically,
that area, the Rio Grande, the Pioneer Park area, has been known for drug use and drug sales. And so, I mean, through the course of my police department, we've tried different operations. We've done sweeps. We've done big operations. But I think the kind of looking at what we're doing now is it's not a sweep. It's not takedowns. It's not a big roundup. It's consistent work every day. The police officers that serve down there, they are some of the most compassionate police officers that I've ever met. They truly want to help people, and so do the social workers. So look, we know that we can't arrest our way out of the problem that we have down there. We truly need to, we can focus on that criminal element. I mean, if you're going to come down there and sell drugs, we're going to arrest you. But if you truly need help, if you're suffering from addiction, let's get you in and get you into some sort of program so that you can start to heal and get back into our society and to contribute again. Those people are addicted to a drug. They need help. And incarceration is not the answer. And so that's what's really, I think, played out for us so well here in Salt Lake City, is that a few years ago when we came up with the concept of social workers, there were some skeptics that said, really, Chief? Social workers attached to a police department? It'll never work. They'll see the image of the police department or the cops and the fear, and they won't come in and ask for the question. Well, I'll tell you what, since July 19th of 2016, we have now seen over 6,000 people walk through the front door of that CCC, the Community Connection Center, and ask for help. And now we've expanded the CCC to include our host officers, our homeless outreach service team, our crisis intervention team officers. And just recently, we've taken our bike squads, and if you go down to 500 West and 2nd South, the south portion of that building is now a small precinct for the bicycle officers. So there are even more police officers down there, and people still come through that front door and need and ask help. You know, personally, I try to get down to the Rio Grande area every day, because I think about that area and what's happening down there a lot. And I need to see firsthand what's going on, and I try to talk to the officers and to give them support and to hear their feedback as to what's working and what's not working. So me personally, I'm invested. It's difficult. It's a difficult situation. I don't think there's one easy button to push. I think we all have to pitch in, and there's a lot of work to be done. I truly am thankful for Mayor Biskupski and her leadership, the team that she's put together, that we can all go down there from Public Works, the Health Department, streets, the service providers. Everybody has a lot of work to do, but if we all come together, and I think through Mayor Biskupski's leadership, that has really come to fruition, that many hands make light work. For many, many years, it's just kind of been left to public safety, maybe police and fire, to be down there and deal with a lot of these problems. And so right now it's refreshing to have that type of support from a mayor and the city council and everybody that really truly wants to make the Rio Grande area better for not only those that live down there, I mean those that are experiencing homelessness, those that visit the area, and those that work down there. I think we're all coming together to truly make a difference.
Next up is our History Minute.
Starting in the 1930s, the Utah Oil and Refining Company used a small parcel of land in the Rose Park area to dump toxic waste from their refining operations. This came to an end in 1957 when Salt Lake City acquired the property, but the area would continue to be known as the Sludge Pit. Mitigation efforts began in 1982 when the Army Corps of Engineers began to build a slurry wall to prevent groundwater contamination. Then, in 1983, the Environmental Protection Agency stepped in and listed this mess as a Superfund site and went to work making it even safer, capping the site with a clay covering and soil and vegetation. Today, the cleaned-up site is part of Rosewood Park. A small parking lot was built over a piece of the original sludge pit, and the rest doubles as a spot with natural vegetation. Every 5 years, the Rose Park sludge pit undergoes inspections just to make sure it's still safe.
That's it for another episode of Capital City News. Thanks for tuning in and staying informed on city government news. We hope you join us next time. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar. This is Poonam Kumar with SLC TV, and this is Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm on a green bike right now, and I'm biking down Main Street in downtown. And the reason why I'm doing that is because May is National Bike Month, and there are a ton of activities and events happening this month. In fact, Colin Quinn Hurst with the city's Transportation Division is going to tell us about some of those events. And our History Minute this week is about the 10th Ward Chapel. Let's start off with our legislative update and look back. At its last city council meeting, Mayor Jackie Biskupski kicked off the city budget season, presenting her recommended 2017-2018 budget of $273 million. Highlights from the mayor's speech included addressing homelessness, improving city infrastructure, advancing clean energy goals, and more. From May through June, the city council will consider and approve the recommended budget, which must be passed by June 22nd of this year. The council also discussed the city's current housing plan and the serious need for more affordable housing. And in case you missed it, here are some other things that have happened in the city. For this week's interview, we'll hear from Colin Quinn Hurst with the city's Transportation Division about biking in the city.
Yeah, Salt Lake City is like a very bike-friendly city. It's mostly flat, and so you can get around most of the city pretty quick and easy without much effort, without breaking a sweat. And we have wide downtown streets with plenty of space to bike on, and then we have a lot of really quiet residential streets with low traffic volumes, low traffic speeds, nice and shady, so you can get out and cruise around the neighborhoods pretty easily too. So right now you see a lot of people out just biking on every street, people of all types, going to the store, going to work, going to school, out with the kids, out with grandma. So, and just by its nature, Salt Lake is a very bike-friendly city. Everything I need is within 3 miles or less, and that's a perfect distance to bike. It's faster than walking. I get a pretty good range, and it's also cheaper than driving, and plus I get outside, I get to see my neighbors. Turns out half the trips in the US are 3 miles or less, which is the perfect length for a bike, and it's true in Salt Lake City too. I can get to work, I can get to pretty much any place I need to go within a short bike trip. And so the city's made a lot of investments in protected bike lanes and bike share, and these are the types of things that get out people of all ages and abilities. So downtown now you'll see someone with their grandma, biking down a major city street, someone with their kids going down to the farmer's market. You'll see people of all ages and abilities at the farmer's market, at the Twilight Concert Series. And in the past couple of years, we've seen an 80% increase in people riding bikes down to these events on summer weekends. One major resource is the Salt Lake City and County Bike Map. For the first time ever, we have a city and county-wide bike map that covers all the low-stress, high-comfort, all ages and abilities routes, not just in the city, but also in the county, so you can make those connections into and out of Salt Lake City. The other major resource is bikeslc.com, and that has the bike map and all the other information about biking in the city online. This month is Bike Month, National Bike Month, so everywhere across the country is everyone's promoting biking this month. And in Salt Lake City in particular, we have a number of events going on about what the city's doing. So one is the University to Downtown Bikeway just opened. And so we're having a grand opening event with the university. The mayor will be there, and it'll be a ride down these low stress, pretty easy routes up to the university and coasting back down. And another event coming up is the Jordan River Trail Bridge, the last gap in the 110-mile Jordan River Trail Legacy Trail network. The last 2-block gap has started construction in Salt Lake City between 200 South and North Temple. So that's a major event, groundbreaking on that. And then another event coming up is Mayor's Bike to Work Day. That's the third Tuesday in May. We have the information up online, bikeslc.com. And the mayor gets out, and we're going to start at the 900 South Pump Track, which is under construction, and ride around the city with the mayor. So that's a great annual event that gets a ton of people out on bikes. Lastly, we'll be doing some trail openings this month. So the new McClellan Trail will have a grand opening. And then, there are also a number of other city events going on that are not run by the city. There's Bike the Branches, which is a fun bike ride around town to the different library branches. There's Bike Prom coming up, which is hosted by the Bicycle Collective. It's a fundraiser and it's a blast. Dress up and go ride bikes around the city and then go to a prom afterwards. So there are a number of great events around the city, and you can find that information at bikeslc.com.
And now it's time for our History Minute about the 18th Ward Chapel.
The original 18th Ward Chapel was designed by Obed Taylor and constructed in 1883. It was the first chapel in the valley to have the trademark spire that would become known all over Utah. Built on A Street and 2nd Avenue, the land for it was donated by the Young family, and it was a popular meeting place. It was where the Sunday school program for the LDS Pioneers was started, and it was also the site of the first Boy Scout troop in Utah. It stood until 1973, when it was torn down, though many of the significant aspects of the building were preserved. In 1976, to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the United States, the state legislature offered up a parcel of land across from the Capitol to reconstruct the chapel. Using the plans in original architectural style, as well as all the pieces salvaged from the demolition, including the original steeple, Gothic windows, doors, and benches, the chapel was rebuilt in 1979. Today, this historic slice of pioneer heritage stands as a non-denominational venue for concerts, weddings, and other special events.
Thanks for watching another episode of Capital City News. There are a ton of events happening in the city for Bike Month. We hope you get a chance to join us and the mayor on May 23rd at 7:30 a.m. here at the 900 South Pump Track for the Mayor's Bike to Work Day. Thanks for watching. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar. Hi, I'm Poonam Kumar with SLC TV, and you're watching Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm inside the Public Safety Building, which is the first net zero public safety building in the country. And it also houses our police, fire, and 911 communications. For this week's episode, we'll talk to Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown, and our History Minute is about the Rose Park sludge pit. Let's start off with our legislative update and look back.
Salt Lake City is ready to talk business. Salt Lake City's Department of Economic Development is focused on making our city a place for everyone. It's our job to help create jobs, advance career development, and improve the quality of life in our city.
And whereas Salt Lake City has recognized the pivotal importance of a robust and diverse economic development model by elevating the department to a cabinet-level status. It's open space. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
There is no higher calling. There is no greater sacrifice.
These officers served with great integrity and character. We honor them this day as we will do each year. We commit to remember them, and we will never, never forget them.
The mural that is behind me here, we've done 156 heads of different women who we are calling catalysts for change. They've made a difference in the arts, in sciences, and in social evolution.
This exhibit not only shows me that women still need more equality, but it shows me how lots of women have overcome such inequality and they've had such trials.
Ellen! I am the first female gay mayor, and I certainly was the first openly gay elected official back in the 90s. I should be creating a foundation in this city that desegregates our city, that brings us together, that helps us understand one another, that helps us understand that we are one. We are all part of the human family.
I just think overall that it's really educational for everybody, especially students in high school. I think we all need to learn a little bit more about equality and about our government.
As young students, you have the opportunity to not only reflect on what you have learned today, but to take action in a way that can help us shape your entire generation.
For this week's interview, we'll hear from Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown about the Community Connection Center substation in the Rio Grande area.
Historically, that area, the Rio Grande, the Pioneer Park area, has been known for drug use and drug sales. And so, I mean, through the course of my police department, we've tried different operations. We've done sweeps, we've done big operations, but I think the kind of looking at what we're doing now is it's not a sweep, it's not takedowns, it's not a big roundup, it's consistent work every day. The police officers that serve down there, they are some of the most compassionate police officers that I've ever met. They truly want to help people, and so do the social workers. So look, we know that we can't arrest our way out of the problem that we have down there. We truly need to, we can focus on that criminal element. I mean, if you're going to come down there and sell drugs, we're going to arrest you. But if you truly need help, if you're suffering from addiction, let's get you in and get you into some sort of program so that you can start to heal and get back into our society and to contribute again. Those people are addicted to a drug. They need help. And incarceration is not the answer. And so that's what's really, I think, played out for us so well here in Salt Lake City, is that a few years ago when we came up with the concept of social workers, there were some skeptics that said, really, Chief? Social workers attached to a police department? It'll never work. They'll see the image of the police department or the cops and the fear, and they won't come in and ask for the question. Well, I'll tell you what, since July 19th of 2016, we have now seen over 6,000 people walk through the front door of that CCC, the Community Connection Center, and ask for help. And now we've expanded the CCC to include our host officers, our homeless outreach service team, our crisis intervention team officers. And just recently, we've taken our bike squads, and if you go down to 500 West and 2nd South, the south portion of that building is now a small precinct for the bicycle officers. So there are even more police officers down there, and people still come through that front door and need and ask help. You know, personally, I try to get down to the Rio Grande area every day, because I think about that area and what's happening down there a lot. And I need to see firsthand what's going on, and I try to talk to the officers and to give them support and to hear their feedback as to what's working and what's not working. So me personally, I'm invested. It's difficult. It's a difficult situation. I don't think there's one easy button to push. I think we all have to pitch in, and there's a lot of work to be done. I truly am thankful for Mayor Biskupski and her leadership, the team that she's put together, that we can all go down there from Public Works, the Health Department, streets, the service providers. Everybody has a lot of work to do, but if we all come together, and I think through Mayor Biskupski's leadership, that has really come to fruition, that many hands make light work. For many, many years, it's just kind of been left to public safety, maybe police and fire, to be down there and deal with a lot of these problems. And so right now it's refreshing to have that type of support from a mayor and the city council and everybody that really truly wants to make the Rio Grande area better for not only those that live down there, I mean those that are experiencing homelessness, those that visit the area, and those that work down there. I think we're all coming together to truly make a difference.
Next up is our History Minute.
Starting in the 1930s, the Utah Oil and Refining Company used a small parcel of land in the Rose Park area to dump toxic waste from their refining operations. This came to an end in 1957 when Salt Lake City acquired the property, but the area would continue to be known as the Sludge Pit. Mitigation efforts began in 1982 when the Army Corps of Engineers began to build a slurry wall to prevent groundwater contamination. Then, in 1983, the Environmental Protection Agency stepped in and listed this mess as a Superfund site and went to work making it even safer, capping the site with a clay covering and soil and vegetation. Today, the cleaned-up site is part of Rosewood Park. A small parking lot was built over a piece of the original sludge pit, and the rest doubles as a spot with natural vegetation. Every 5 years, the Rose Park sludge pit undergoes inspections just to make sure it's still safe.
That's it for another episode of Capital City News. Thanks for tuning in and staying informed on city government news. We hope you join us next time. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar. This is Poonam Kumar with SLC TV, and this is Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm on a green bike right now, and I'm biking down Main Street in downtown. And the reason why I'm doing that is because May is National Bike Month, and there are a ton of activities and events happening this month. In fact, Colin Quinn Hurst with the city's Transportation Division is going to tell us about some of those events. And our History Minute this week is about the 10th Ward Chapel. Let's start off with our legislative update and look back. At its last city council meeting, Mayor Jackie Biskupski kicked off the city budget season, presenting her recommended 2017-2018 budget of $273 million. Highlights from the mayor's speech included addressing homelessness, improving city infrastructure, advancing clean energy goals, and more. From May through June, the city council will consider and approve the recommended budget, which must be passed by June 22nd of this year. The council also discussed the city's current housing plan and the serious need for more affordable housing. And in case you missed it, here are some other things that have happened in the city. For this week's interview, we'll hear from Colin Quinn Hurst with the city's Transportation Division about biking in the city.
Yeah, Salt Lake City is like a very bike-friendly city. It's mostly flat, and so you can get around most of the city pretty quick and easy without much effort, without breaking a sweat. And we have wide downtown streets with plenty of space to bike on, and then we have a lot of really quiet residential streets with low traffic volumes, low traffic speeds, nice and shady, so you can get out and cruise around the neighborhoods pretty easily too. So right now you see a lot of people out just biking on every street, people of all types, going to the store, going to work, going to school, out with the kids, out with grandma. So, and just by its nature, Salt Lake is a very bike-friendly city. Everything I need is within 3 miles or less, and that's a perfect distance to bike. It's faster than walking. I get a pretty good range, and it's also cheaper than driving, and plus I get outside, I get to see my neighbors. Turns out half the trips in the US are 3 miles or less, which is the perfect length for a bike, and it's true in Salt Lake City too. I can get to work, I can get to pretty much any place I need to go within a short bike trip. And so the city's made a lot of investments in protected bike lanes and bike share, and these are the types of things that get out people of all ages and abilities. So downtown now you'll see someone with their grandma, biking down a major city street, someone with their kids going down to the farmer's market. You'll see people of all ages and abilities at the farmer's market, at the Twilight Concert Series. And in the past couple of years, we've seen an 80% increase in people riding bikes down to these events on summer weekends. One major resource is the Salt Lake City and County Bike Map. For the first time ever, we have a city and county-wide bike map that covers all the low-stress, high-comfort, all ages and abilities routes, not just in the city, but also in the county, so you can make those connections into and out of Salt Lake City. The other major resource is bikeslc.com, and that has the bike map and all the other information about biking in the city online. This month is Bike Month, National Bike Month, so everywhere across the country everyone's promoting biking this month. And in Salt Lake City in particular, we have a number of events going on about what the city's doing. So one is the University to Downtown Bikeway just opened, and so we're having a grand opening event with the university. The mayor will be there, and it'll be a ride down these low-stress, pretty easy routes up to the university and coasting back down. And another event coming up is the Jordan River Trail Bridge, the last gap in the 110-mile Jordan River Trail Legacy Trail network. The last 2-block gap has started construction in Salt Lake City between 200 South and North Temple. So that's a major event, groundbreaking on that. And then another event coming up is Mayor's Bike to Work Day. That's the third Tuesday in May. We have the information up online, bikeslc.com. And the mayor gets out, and we're going to start at the 900 South pump track, which is under construction, and ride around the city with the mayor. So that's a great annual event that gets a ton of people out on bikes. Lastly, we'll be doing some trail openings this month. So the new McClellan Trail will have a grand opening. And then, there are also a number of other city events going on that are not run by the city. There's Bike the Branches, which is a fun bike ride around town to the different library branches. There's Bike Prom coming up, which is hosted by the Bicycle Collective. It's a fundraiser and it's a blast. Dress up and go ride bikes around the city and then go to a prom afterwards. So there are a number of great events around the city, and you can find that information at bikeslc.com.
And now it's time for our History Minute about the 18th Ward Chapel.
The original 18th Ward Chapel was designed by Obed Taylor and constructed in 1883. It was the first chapel in the valley to have the trademark spire that would become known all over Utah. Built on A Street and 2nd Avenue, the land for it was donated by the Young family, and it was a popular meeting place. It was where the Sunday school program for the LDS Pioneers was started, and it was also the site of the first Boy Scout troop in Utah. It stood until 1973 when it was torn down, though many of the significant aspects of the building were preserved. In 1976, to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the United States, the state legislature offered up a parcel of land across from the Capitol to reconstruct the chapel. Using the plans and original architectural style, as well as all the pieces salvaged from the demolition, including the original steeple, Gothic windows, doors, and benches, the chapel was rebuilt in 1979. Today, this historic slice of pioneer heritage stands as a non-denominational venue for concerts, weddings, and other special events.
Thanks for watching another episode of Capital City News. There are a ton of events happening in the city for Bike Month. We hope you get a chance to join us and the mayor on May 23rd at 7:30 a.m. here at the 900 South Pump Track for the Mayor's Bike to Work Day. Thanks for watching. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar. Hi, I'm Poonam Kumar with SLC TV, and you're watching Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm inside the Public Safety Building, which is the first net zero public safety building in the country. And it also houses our police, fire, and 911 communications. For this week's episode, we'll talk to Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown, and our History Minute is about the Rose Park sludge pit. Let's start off with our legislative update and look back.
Salt Lake City is ready to talk business. Salt Lake City's Department of Economic Development is focused on making our city a place for everyone. It's our job to help create jobs, advance career development, and improve the quality of life in our city.
And whereas Salt Lake City has recognized the pivotal importance of a robust and diverse economic development model by elevating the department to a cabinet-level status.
It's open space.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. There is no higher calling. There is no greater sacrifice.
These officers served with great integrity and character. We honor them this day as we will do each year. We commit to remember them, and we will never, never forget them.
The mural that is behind me here, we've done 156 heads of different women who we are calling catalysts for change. They made a difference in the arts, in sciences, and in social evolution.
This exhibit not only shows me that women still need more equality, but it shows me how lots of women have overcome such inequality and they've had such trials.
Ellen! I am the first female gay mayor, and I certainly was the first openly gay elected official back in the 90s. I should be creating a foundation in this city that desegregates our city, that brings us together, that helps us understand one another, that helps us understand that we are one. We are all part of the human family.
I just think overall that it's really educational for everybody, especially students in high school. I think we all need to learn a little bit more about equality and about our government.
As young students, you have the opportunity to not only reflect on what you have learned today, but to take action in a way that can help us shape your entire generation.
For this week's interview, we'll hear from Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown about the Community Connection Center substation in the Rio Grande area.
Historically, that area, the Rio Grande, the Pioneer Park area, has been known for drug use and drug sales. And so, I mean, through the course of my police department, we've tried different operations. We've done sweeps. We've done big operations. But I think the kind of looking at what we're doing now is it's not a sweep. It's not takedowns. It's not a big roundup. It's consistent work every day. The police officers that serve down there, they are some of the most compassionate police officers that I've ever met. They truly want to help people, and so do the social workers. So look, we know that we can't arrest our way out of the problem that we have down there. We truly need to, we can focus on that criminal element. I mean, if you're going to come down there and sell drugs, we're going to arrest you. But if you truly need help, if you're suffering from addiction, let's get you in and get you into some sort of program so that you can start to heal and get back into our society and to contribute again. Those people are addicted to a drug. They need help. And incarceration is not the answer. And so that's what's really, I think, played out for us so well here in Salt Lake City, is that a few years ago when we came up with the concept of social workers, there were some skeptics that said, really, Chief, social workers attached to a police department? It'll never work. They'll see the image of the police department or the cops and the fear, and they won't come in and ask for the question. Well, I'll tell you what, since July 19th of 2016, we have now seen over 6,000 people walk through the front door of that CCC, the Community Connection Center, and ask for help. And now we've expanded the CCC to include our host officers, our homeless outreach service team, our crisis intervention team officers. And just recently, we've taken our bike squads, and if you go down to 500 West and 2nd South, the south portion of that building is now a small precinct for the bicycle officers. So there are even more police officers down there, and people still come through that front door and need and ask help. You know, personally, I try to get down to the Rio Grande area every day, because I think about that area and what's happening down there a lot. And I need to see firsthand what's going on, and I try to talk to the officers and to give them support and to hear their feedback as to what's working and what's not working. So me personally, I'm invested. It's difficult. It's a difficult situation. I don't think there's one easy button to push. I think we all have to pitch in, and there's a lot of work to be done. I truly am thankful for Mayor Biskupski and her leadership, the team that she's put together, that we can all go down there from Public Works, the Health Department,
Yes. Okay, we're reconvening our work session. We are on to item 7, Capital Improvement Projects Overview. Ben from our staff is taking the lead from the council office on this. I'm looking for Mike Ackerlow and for Holly, I think. Or do you have someone joining you, Mike? Okay. Great. Ben, do you want to get us started? This is kind of our first look at CIP.
So I think what's most helpful for the council is the table on the second page, which reviews the funding sources for the last 2 fiscal years and what's proposed for this fiscal year. The total proposed budget for CIP is 17% less than last year, but this is largely because there was an unusual amount of one-time funding from the state and the county of almost $9 million that we don't have for next fiscal year. The ongoing funding is 4% more than the ongoing funding last year, so that's a good thing. Our general fund contribution is increasing. The amount of CIP that is going to debt service is almost 50% this year if you look at all the funding sources. And if you just look at the general fund contribution to CIP, it's a little over 70% is needed for debt service. And this is projected to increase until 2022, and then there'll be about a 20-25% drop in the debt service for CIP. And Finance provided a chart toward the end of the staff report that shows this debt load out to 2022. The amount of unrestricted funding that's available to the council that can go to any project is about $1 million less than last year. It totals $4.3 million. And the funding log for fiscal year 2018 totals $36 million in funding requests. And this is 130% of the available funding. And you may remember last year, CIP had over $100 million in funding requests, whereas this year, the amount of funding requested is only $36 million. And the reason for the difference is there are a couple dozen projects that have been removed from the CIP funding log from last year that don't show up. So there are funding needs the city has that are not reflected on the proposed funding log for this year. And one of the policy questions highlights that the administration is working on a capital facility plan, which, as I understand it, will include all of those items that have been removed from the funding log and is supposed to provide a more comprehensive picture, kind of a 10-year CIP plan of all the infrastructure needs for the city. And in Budget Amendment number 6, the administration requested funding for that capital facility plan. I think it was about $29,000, and they said that would fully fund it, and it would be completed toward the end of this calendar year. The council might also want to take a look at the $1.9 million in old CIP accounts that are proposed to be repurposed this year. And there's a table showing the old accounts as well as the uses for the money on page 7 of the staff report. And most of that 1.9 million is coming from an old streetcar account that has 1.2 million in it. And the last thing I'll point out is the council's priority of funding street infrastructure for this year. There are 2 different methodologies touched on in the staff report about what that ideal level of funding would look like annually. One of them is from Transportation's 10-year CIP plan, which was part of the Impact Fee Facilities plan last year. And it outlines different categories of street infrastructure and what the recommended annual funding would be. And it totals about $33 million a year. And the other methodology is the Impact Fee Facilities plan for the transportation system. So this is not just pavement, it's also things like signal devices, the actual signs that we have, as well as bridges. And it comes to a similar amount, slightly higher. It's about $35 million a year. And so what is actually proposed this year in CIP just for pavement comes to $7.4 million, which is not quite a third of what our annual ideal funding would be for streets. Just to give you an idea of where we are and what our ideal level of funding would be, it's a pretty big gap.
And could you clarify for us, when we're looking at those models that say ideal funding, most of those are based on 10-year plans. Is that $35 million a year to get us to a level where we have a more sustainable maintenance schedule, or would we expect that would be an ongoing $35 million a year? And I guess I'm concerned about the appearance that we've compressed all of our needs into a 10-year plan.
Yeah. Some of it is a backlog of deferred maintenance needs. but the wider definition of the transportation system, including signals and signs and other things, that does reflect our projected growth as well as the backlog. And I can't say to what extent that is a backlog, but I wouldn't expect it to be, half of the amount.
Okay. And one more thing, Ben, if you could, do you have a percent of budget for CIP?
So it's of the entire city budget for the general fund. It's 6.5% to 7%, depending on how you calculate it. There's different things that you can remove, like an RDA pass-through that you don't count in the typical general fund, but about 6.5% to 7%.
Our 11% that, we've been from 9 was the goal, but okay. Thanks, Ben. Anything else?
The funding log, and we'll get to this more later in the year, but the funding log doesn't include the CIP RDA projects that the board earlier today decided to discuss and add into the general fund CIP context. So I'll be working on adding those projects in. And then the funding log does include $4 million of impact fee projects, but it's not always clear as you read through the projects which ones are impact fee eligible, if they're being recommended to have the full impact fee funding, or if you could add more. That information isn't on the funding log yet. And we also don't have the balances for available to spend impact fees. Hopefully we'll have that when we go through the project allocations later in the year. But as of right now, the last numbers we received were from last fiscal year.
Okay. Thanks, Ben. Mike, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks for letting us have a few minutes to talk about CIP. I want to give you a brief overview of some of the changes we've made, but also some of the, both administratively, but also when it comes to financing projects. One thing that Ben mentioned that is worth noting is that the number of applications went down this year. And part of that is because of a different way of application that we went through. In the past, divisions, departments could just apply for whatever, and they all came in together. And our office would sort those out and then include them in the log and take them to the board and then the mayor and then you all. This year we did it a little bit different, where Lisa Schaefer and Mike Rieberg met and reviewed all the applications first, knowing that budgets are tight, that pay-as-you-go funding will be very limited, went through those and prioritized the projects that would move forward to final review. So that did help us, and our board was appreciative of that as well, because they always feel overwhelmed when you have $75 million worth of projects come in and $5 million that you can actually approve. So we believe this is a more strategic approach, something that has been thought through and vetted a little more carefully. We also have implemented, and our first meeting will actually be held here at the end of this week, a quarterly CIP meeting with all departments and divisions to review projects, to make sure they're moving forward, look at timeliness issues, and then also better coordination moving forward. So we make sure that projects as they come to you have been layered, or we know that one is contingent upon another. Whatever the case may be, they are working more closely together. And also, as Ben mentioned, we are working on the CFP. We have been accumulating data from all the departments and divisions. This will be a 10-year capital facilities plan. It will be fiscally constrained, and it'll be an ongoing discussion with you all to see how we pay for this. Fred Philpott is doing that plan for us, doing that modeling for us. So he'll come and show all the projects, show what funding is available, and then what the demand will be to fully fund that plan. And that's going to be a real eye-opening discussion that we'll have to find ways to fund what is needed. Again, that can be adjusted as needs be. Fred will give us a model that we can use and adjust as time goes on, so it's not set in stone. We can make changes to it. We wanted flexibility. If you have a 10-year plan that's adopted, as soon as you go outside that 10-year plan, that plan starts to become obsolete. So we want to make sure that it's something that, as priorities change, we can adjust that plan and then also look at those funding sources. So that's really what we've done on the administrative side. On the funding side, you're all well aware that our debt service has increased quite a bit the last couple of years because of the SARS payment on the ice sheet up at Steiner, and that will go through fiscal year 2021. So back in, when we see you in 2022, we'll have more pay-as-you-go funding. This year, when we first started with the board, we estimated that the transfer amount would be about a little over 15 million, which resulted in just over 2 million for the board to allocate to projects. And that was certainly a tough task. As we worked closer on the budgets with the finance office, that amount did increase to 4.3. So the board was able to allocate 4.3 worth of funding. Meeting with the mayor also said, well, what other sources are available that we could look at? And we pulled out the CIP log of past projects and looked at projects from 2013 and before that either had were finished and just had not been recaptured, or had been languishing, or nothing had happened, and recaptured a number of those, which is the 1.9. That money was used towards infrastructure projects in the city. And I think, and also as finally has been mentioned, last year we did have one-time funding that was, of course, a great help to us, 3.75 from the county, and there was also 4 million from the state, I believe. So that was something we don't have this year, and we don't know what we'll have in upcoming years. I do have balances for you on impact fees, and I can also tell you when those refunds are due. We did send that information to the council, so they do have those balances, but I do have them here tonight as well. We're doing pretty well in terms of spending. We have some funds in police that you're aware of, and you all gave us $500,000 to start that for the police precinct in Sugar House in impact fees. So we're working with our consultants to identify the need, do a needs assessment, and then what a potential site would look like. We'll be coming back to you for more impact fees to purchase the land once that's been identified. Parks has about $1 million left that will not fully cover what is being asked for in this year's CIP. So there'll have to be some tough decisions made on what can actually be paid for out of impact fees for parks. Fire, we're moving forward with the fire stations, where there's about $192,000 left in there. That will go to the fire training center. So we're in our first budget amendment of next year, we'll be coming to you to use those impact fees for the fire training center. And streets has a balance of 5.6 after this CIP with what they're asking for. If it's all approved, they'll have about 3.1 remaining. We're good on refunds there. There is no urgency right now. And there's also a capacity issue there, making sure that if they get the funds allocated, the matches are there and or the capacity to actually do the projects is there. It's part of the reason that CAN is asking for an additional engineer to help move those CIP projects along a little faster. The mayor has expressed a strong desire to see CIP projects in the ground and started within 2 to 3 years. And after 3 years, if they're not, she wants to evaluate those as a possible recapture. We want to make sure that the projects are shovel ready, that they're moving forward, and if they're not, bring those to you through a budget amendment as part of a recapture. So I think that is everything that's on my list. I'm happy to answer questions, give you any more information.
Yeah, I'll open it up for questions, Ben. I have one right off the bat, though. There was a miscalculation at the state level for Class C funds, and I think that's been incorporated in your revenue projections. Can you tell me, was that an error in calculation, so it'll be ongoing, or was there some one-time money going back when they recalculated that? So is it a combination of one-time money and ongoing, or is it all ongoing?
If I can defer to Mary Beth on that one, I think she has a better answer. Here she is. And I know that's still being negotiated, that dollar amount. We have not included that in the CIP.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Mary Beth, do you have any additional information on that?
Oh my gosh, this chair is like weird. So the 3.5 million will be ongoing. The statute that was put into place in 2016 actually did not calculate the revenues like we thought they were going to come in. They have gone back, and I believe the state has allocated a lot of money. I'm thinking 26 million, but I can get that number for you off the top of my head. I've got so many numbers in it, but I think it's around 26 million to all local jurisdiction and some counties. I believe the mayor's office is working on that allocation, and that will come back to the city in a separate funding, probably a separate budget amendment at a different time.
So there is some additional, the settlement renegotiation will be additional funds.
That's correct.
But it's not included in this. This is ongoing funding.
That's correct.
Okay. But we don't have any clue what that additional Class C would be, do we?
Well, I know what they've proposed, and we came back with a different proposal, but I do not know where that proposal sits at this time.
Okay. Thanks, Mary Beth. So are we funding anything that would be Class C eligible in our general fund?
Using the current Class C, yes, but not this proposed amount. So we always get our Class C every year, and we have projects recommended for that amount, but we did not include this additional.
Okay, and so what I was getting at is I wouldn't want to fund out of general fund Class C eligible projects if we were expecting some revenue, even though we don't know exactly what that's going to be. And you haven't.
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry, just question. I think things like sidewalks and ADA ramps and things like that are Class C eligible. So we don't typically fund those kinds of things with Class C funds, but those are proposed for funding by the general fund in the CIP. So there's probably a little bit of a gray area of what does the law allow us to fund with Class C versus what we've typically funded with Class C.
So Stan, when we come back with that number, which hopefully will be when you have the CIP discussion, maybe we will have the final settlement number at that point in time, then you can always change the use
Great.
of the general fund portion to a Class C portion.
Great. And so having that information of what other things would be eligible would be helpful too.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting we change our historic pattern, but it's worth knowing what that is. Okay, great. Thank you.
So the issue, the question is, what is on the current CIP list that could possibly be moved over to CIP, thus freeing up other general fund?
Yeah, that would be helpful. And I think just a little bit better understanding of what is actually eligible for Class C would be helpful for me. Okay. But yeah, I think that would be a good part of that discussion. Okay. Council members. Yeah, Lisa.
This is actually for Ben, and just looking at the report, which is excellent as usual, where you have the list of old CIP projects, those amounts, are those leftover funds that are no longer needed for those projects? Like, for example, I'm looking at pay station parking meters, and it's $18,000 and a little more. Why is that money not needed for parking meters anymore? Do we know?
I'd have to defer to the administration. I'm not sure why these specific items were proposed for repurposing. If they're no longer needed, I don't know.
It's a range. So some are no longer needed. This, in particular, was when the notes we have here show that these were for upgrading the parking meters. If you remember when we did that, and these were leftover funds. So that's why they would be.
So the job's been completed and that money's not there.
And a lot of those smaller amounts, that's the case.
Right.
With those.
But like on a big one, like the Greenway progress for Sugar House streetcar, $143,000. That's because we're not pursuing streetcar.
Actually, I think that was project completed too, if I recall.
So, and there's two streetcar related items.
Right.
I'm just jumping in. There's the Greenway and the amount allocated.
We had allocated significant
1.2 million.
Yeah,
at the very bottom.
We had allocated at the time significant additional funds for the Greenway, and I think that came in under.
And this shows that the notes I have here show that there was a scope change on that, and I can certainly get back to you more detail.
Okay, that I just wanted some clarification because I wasn't quite sure. And on the Lindsay Gardens ADA playground, I know the new playground is opened, so those were funds that weren't used for that project.
Right.
Good job. Okay. Thanks. I just needed that clarification.
Great. Other questions or comments?
And yes.
Do you have a timeline for when we expect to, have the project specific CIP conversation?
Usually you hold that starting in August, September.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we're ready when everything's been transmitted to your office. So whenever you'd like.
That sounds about right.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Also, I wanted in our policy discussion I'd be interested in having an update on how we're using maintenance, if we're building in maintenance costs to CIP. We talked about that previously, and I just love having an update on that, please.
So a brief update on that. It's been part of the CIP process in the past, but not very scientific. It's been, what are the ongoing costs going to be, but that always isn't taken into consideration. Moving forward, we've included that as part of our CIP application so that we get an actual cost of that, and that is obviously of real concern because as we look at what different departments are trying to absorb or put in their operating budgets, it's not there, and if we keep adding more projects, how are we going to increase those costs? So that is something that moving forward as part of our redo on CIP, that will be a part of the discussion.
So, Mike, are you requiring that now as part of a CIP application?
Yes, right.
And so if you could figure out a way to transmit that as part of that application process for those recommendations, I think that would be very helpful for the council as well.
Absolutely.
Even if it's just another column. I know
Mhm.
it gets all fine print now, but another column I think would be very helpful to say this is an ongoing cost because we would like to see that as well.
Okay. And our log this year, I don't know if you've seen it, but it is reduced quite a bit. We took a lot out of information out of there, so it's a little easier to read. But certainly moving forward, we'll have that on there.
Additional questions, comments?
One question for you. This might be more public utilities, but stormwater kind of recapture use is curb and gutter a lot, but maybe more included in that. Is this talking about that whole system when you talk about curb and gutter, or are there the parts that utilities would be responsible for that would not be included in this?
Are you talking about our recapture?
Yeah, recapture, but also just dispersion of stormwater, streets and alleys and.
Well, good question. I'd want to ask on that one. I think part of that is it might be a mixed.
Okay.
So, Mike, if you could circle around with public utilities on that. We had made a request a year ago or so for some estimates related to what would it cost the stormwater system to move curb and gutter into that system rather than the general fund. And I think they ran some numbers, but I don't know that we ever circled back to visit those.
Okay.
We received a study from Public Utilities on curb and gutter, and I believe the gap was 5 or 7 million. I'm looking at Lehu, I don't remember.
5.5 million
Okay.
annually is the recommended funding.
Right.
And the clarification they made was Public Utilities, if I'm remembering correctly, they are responsible for the drain and then 5 feet of the curb and gutter on either side. And then beyond that, it falls to public services and transportation.
Yeah, I know, but
And I think, right, there's a historic practice. And then
There's a historic practice and there's a policy discussion that belongs at this level that's not happening because we keep getting that response of, well, this is how we historically do it. But it truly is, to my understanding, a policy conversation. So 2 things I would like to see pulled out of that. One, I don't want to see what the gap is because that's going to be an unreasonable amount and we're not funding it now. So why would we all of a sudden fund it in a stormwater fee? But I want to have the policy conversation about should the stormwater fee expand its funding for repairing that collection system. It was a policy that was decided way back 20, 30 years ago when stormwater became a fee that they would not, but that doesn't mean they can't. So if we really want to be serious about curb and gutter, then I think that's worth having a policy conversation. Because clearly we're not keeping up with it in the general fund and the CIP project. And
I don't want it to get lost in our discussion about streets and infrastructure because it's a little separate. But there are parts of the city, as you know, that don't have it at all, and that'd be a new thing, not just kind of maintaining what we have. So.
Right, and I apologize.
caught
I'm
in there.
a little frustrated because we've had the same historic problem with streets. When every time we talk about streets or fleet, or any of that, it's a $35 million gap. Okay, well, we're not going to talk about it because we don't have $35 million. That's not okay anymore. We have to talk about it in some increment that we can at least begin to address. And that's the sort of response I think we got back from public utilities. Well, it'd be $5 million a year and that would increase rates by this much. It's like, that's the perfect scenario. And We are far from perfect right now, so.
Okay, so I've got notes on that. We can follow up with public utilities. Connecting that also into the capital facilities plan would be helpful, I think.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much. If you have additional information you'd like, contact Ben, who will contact Mike and get that to you. We'll be looking at this probably in one of our meetings in August. Will be the large discussion about the project-specific proposals.
Stan, I actually have one more question. We talked a little bit about at our retreat about the importance of having the street survey. And I don't know, this maybe is something that Margaret needs to weigh in on, but in our staff report, it talks about whether it's permissible under separation of powers for the council to request through a contingent appropriation that draft reports come on the citywide pavement come to the legislative branch and at the same time that it arrives at the administrative branch. Is that there? Can we look in to see if that's possible? If we can make that request so that we all get it at the same time, and because we're very eager to look at what the street survey looks like.
It would certainly be helpful, in particular around our Class C additional funds conversation. That might be really helpful.
And with that, I'm finished. Thank you, Stan.
Thanks. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Holly.
Thank you.
You didn't say anything. I feel like I need to ask you a question.
I prepped Mike well.
What'd you do? What'd you do for Memorial Day? That's my question.
I put window wells on a house that I'm building.
There you go. Okay. Thanks. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you.
We have one more item on our agenda, but before we get to it, let's talk about announcements.
Okay. First of all, displaced parking. You can get out this evening.
Get out. That's probably a good thing.
Just don't try to come back. So let's see. The access won't officially open up until 5 p.m. on June 6th, your next meeting day, but you will be able to get through. And then let's see. Yeah, okay, I think those are the only ones coming up, and then you have the Arts Festival. One of the things that we've been working with the administration on is trying to keep access on council meeting nights, particularly where you will have a budget hearing. And we're having some success, but we don't quite have it yet. And so be thinking about whether, how far you want to take that and whether you want to really set a firm standard about that. What we get is complaints from people who, not people who are in wheelchairs necessarily because they have a little bit more mobility, but folks who maybe are walking with the aid of a cane or a walker and can't walk the extra distance and therefore not participating. So let us know how far you want us to take those conversations.
It's Cindy.
Uh-huh.
Is the date incorrect on the displaced parking information in that last sentence of the first paragraph? However, if at any time between May 30 and June 30? Did it mean to say June 6th?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, just making sure that we're not barred for a month.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Yes. Okay, then I'm going to skip item B and go to item C. They relate to each other. On your annual meeting calendar in July, you currently have meetings on July 11th and July 18th. The conference that we just skipped on the item B on the previous page is scheduled for July 18th. And so we want to check to see, do you still want to keep your meeting July 18th, or is there sufficient interest in going to that conference that you would want to move your July 18th meeting to July 25th? So keep that in mind as you say.
And I would throw out there that RDA be moved to July 11th, the traditional second meeting of the month, rather than on the 25th.
So do we have people interested in going to the homeless conference? Just in show of hands.
And Derek is as well.
Well, there you go. Guess that's your answer. So I guess we'll be meeting on the 25th.
Okay. All right.
And is that okay if we do RDA on July 11th? That's on
Yeah,
the
I think that'd
second
be okay.
Tuesday? Okay.
We may need to have a little bit of a formal meeting, just depending on what comes up, but.
And we'll need
Okay.
to work with you on we'll have a lot to prepare between June 13th and it won't, but
yeah,
we'll do what we can do. Okay, and then the Homeless Resource Center Town Hall meetings. The desire originally was to hold these earlier in the year, but the information just really has not been available. We are looking at July 12th and 13th, and the staff has been working with council members Mendenhall and Derek Kitchen, and we need some help with this. Because of our election timing and things like that, not all council members can host meetings or send out mailings after June 6th. And so we've been viewing that this would be something convened by the full council as opposed to the council members in their district. So it would come from the council-wide budget, and it would still be hosted in the district by the council member, but would be arranged, convened, et cetera, by the full council. So first question is, does the whole council want to attend, or should this really be focused on the council members from the district or those also available? Erin has a...
May I make a pitch on behalf of Derek and myself that we're so appreciative of everyone's support for the initiatives we are seeking around support of the host communities. And I think to have, thinking back to our public hearing at Mountain View Elementary, did I get that right? Around the West Side Master Plan. And what that meant to that community, that it would be wonderful to have the council come to these two town hall meetings. We are looking at one right after the other, 2 days in a row. And I realize with our council meeting, that would be 3 days in a row. It would be very meaningful, and I think it would be informative. So the other part is this survey asking communities about what type of investments, what type of amenities and services would you like to see in your community that you don't currently? And that might help guide us as we look at maybe our toolkit of support, both as RDA and council members, for ways to support the host community. So that's part of the goal of these town hall meetings.
So I might be a little confused because I thought we were looking at mitigation around the sites. Because as I was looking at and maybe it's evolved since I was engaged with this, but I thought we were talking to neighbors about what are your concerns about impact to the neighborhood, and what are some things we might want to consider to mitigate the impact that this may potentially have on your neighborhood, in particular as we look at our text amendment around conditional use and that kind of stuff.
When I talk about the survey, that is at this point speaking to a broader community context of the ways that we can support the host communities. As for if we held a public hearing at the town hall, it would be around the text amendment and the considerations we're looking at in there.
So that's good to know, because that kind of leads me to the next one. your question, I think. So here's another question for you, Aaron. I'm not going to speak for other council members, but the back-to-back meetings might be challenging. Is it helpful to have leadership there, or do you think it needs to be the entire council?
Well, I'm not seeing the words public hearing in this announcement, and so I think it's not critical that the entire council be there.
So public hearing would suggest a different form of, or a different level of participation, I think.
We were planning that following this, there would be a public hearing here at the city. We thought that, and this is an evolving idea, but we thought that these meetings would inform that public hearing, that comment at these meetings or the information that's gathered and that type of a thing would certainly be added to the record for that topic.
So it wouldn't be a public hearing, but the comments would be taken as public comment.
Typically, if it relates to that specific, an agenda item or something like that, we would just bring it in, make it part of the record. We would attach it to our staff reports and things like that if we made a record of the comment.
As if someone had called in and gave the comment, right?
But we could do it however the council wants.
I'm wondering if we, I'm intrigued with a couple things. I'm intrigued with the idea of a citywide survey that might get rather than a neighborhood specific, but I don't want to dilute I think the desire to speak to those, what we would consider to be more impacted neighborhoods, and have them speak. I think there's a way to inform the conditional use process and the text amendment stuff, but I also wouldn't want people to feel like whatever they said at a meeting that's not a public hearing takes place of the need to comment at a public hearing. So I'm not quite sure how to balance all that, but I think
Share that concern.
Yeah, I think it's really important that, I think we can do that through the messaging in those meetings, but if something bubbles out of there that gets incorporated into conditional use or mitigation, I still think it's important for people for us to figure out a way to circle around with those participants to let them know, here's the process, here's the public hearing process, here's our general public participation process for any kind of text amendment. So that's me. Anybody else?
I think this serves a different role, though, in some ways, because you're talking about a public hearing that's a little more narrow focused on specific policy or zoning issues, and you have advertised it as such. This is the particular issue we're looking at. Here's the information, that sort of thing. I think these are a little preliminary to that, and so I'd see them as a way to help vent, get ideas, to inform that later process a bit. I also like the idea of the citywide, because we're talking about 2 new facilities, but we have existing facilities that are going to remain in place that have similar impacts on the community in different ways, but aren't zoned that way. I'm thinking of the El Manos area issue, say Rescue Mission, places like that are going to stay in their places, and we may need to take some ideas that we're finding out and apply them in different areas of the city as well.
Well, if this is an appropriate setting, I'm really intrigued with the idea of talking to people about the impact of homeless services, because there are other services that could come up in other neighborhoods, whether that's halfway kind of stuff or some of the services you're already seeing in particular in District 2 where we could get some good information about how people feel about the impacts around that.
Yeah.
I've mentioned to staff that I'm concerned about the citywide survey for 2 reasons. That I think we love data and feedback, and yet I think that's a significant amount of data and feedback that we probably won't do anything with for the most part. You know, that there's a majority of the city that isn't directly impacted by the future HRCs. And that's my second concern is, well, one is asking staff to process through, you know, potentially every resident feedback. And then second, it is that I feel concerned about asking for feedback and then not doing anything with it. So the optics on that from a resident's perspective aren't necessarily good, but I think that there could be great ideas that come from residents who aren't in the areas also. So I want to be cognizant of what we're asking staff to take on, and so I want to raise that.
Yeah, Charlie.
So just one thought, and you know, and I don't know if it's a citywide survey or neighborhood specific. I think one of the things that gives me a little bit of pause is we make decisions regularly on things that have enormous impact on neighborhoods. It could be, you know, something different than homeless services, but you know, I'm wondering if we, you know, continue to make decisions and then we go and say, okay, well, how can we mitigate this? If we pick one thing to mitigate and we choose to ignore all the other things that have, you know, direct impact on other neighborhoods that may not be related to homeless services, then it goes back to the whole pitting neighborhood versus neighborhood, and it's like, well, you know what, these two neighborhoods were able to get something out of, you know, something that they were opposed to, and we got nothing, and we're stuck dealing with the ramifications. I think it's something that we have to think through the messaging component, because we make unpopular decisions a lot, and it's totally unrealistic that we can mitigate every single one of those. Now, I know that we've talked about, you know, the importance of mitigating some of the impact and trying to deal with some of that impact, but we have to be very careful how we phrase that and how we implement it, because there are a lot of things that we impact neighborhoods with that we don't do anything with.
Sure, I agree, and I think we have a lot more specifics to work with at this point than we have in the past. You're right. This might boil down to some things that are not necessarily that specific. It might boil down to community kind of oversight groups or things like that that are more responsive long term instead of a specific zoning issues that may do that. I do think that the public process itself is probably beneficial, period, at this point. I know it's going to be difficult again because you are going to run into all those hundreds and hundreds of ideas and passions again, but I think that process piece is something that we really need to keep an eye on as we move to the final product here, because we know populations, we know locations, we have some ideas about other things to look at. But I think that process is going to be the key piece in this one. As much as anything we get out of it, just informing the public, having them talk a little bit. Hopefully we've moved a little bit past that initial fear, emotional stage. There's some of that still left, I think, but there's also the next stage is you start forming ideas and forming concrete ideas about this is what it actually means potentially. This is how maybe I can participate in this. That's really what I'm hoping to get to. I'm hoping we're to that phase, but I'm not sure yet.
So it doesn't sound like a public hearing, so I'm wondering, Aaron, if this works for you, just let me know, please. I'm thinking maybe what we do is invite the council, but I'm just whispering to Charlie, we can make a commitment that one of us will be at each of those meetings, so we can have a sort of a visible leadership role there. But I think it's completely appropriate for any council member to attend, and it sounds like you'd like that. So is that workable?
Great.
And then I think if we can have a tentative schedule of like the public hearing process, so that we can talk about that even in that setting too, so people are aware of every opportunity.
Yeah, and that's one of the 3 goals,
Yeah.
is to make greater awareness around the next steps to be involved.
And then I like the idea of a citywide survey, but that does feel kind of overwhelming. So,
Would the alternative, Cindy, be districts 4 and 5?
would you even do the whole district, or would you do a radius maybe around the?
That's initially what I thought, but I understand arguments for larger too.
Yeah, either, any one of those three options would work. And for the council members who haven't been in that loop yet, we had some public feedback from a person who is very, very educated and very involved in public participation on a national level. And she agreed to help us as a volunteer at first and gave us some really good information. And so with the chair and vice chair's approval, we have commissioned her to assist us with this concept of doing a survey before the public meeting so that we can gather more public input and really try to hone that as a tool for our public participation. So we're hoping to be able to build that capacity in-house based on this very brief and quite inexpensive consulting arrangements with her. So that's the background on the survey. Unless the council has a preference, we can just work with the two council members to figure out whether it's a small area around the resource centers or whether it's the full district.
Okay.
Does it have to be either or? I mean, is this a multi sort of format one where it gets mailed out, you can do it online, you can opt in kind of thing, or?
It's my understanding that it would be mailed out, but it would also be available on Open City Hall. That's what we're looking at so far.
So that might provide some broader opportunities for people who feel compelled to participate, but we aren't necessarily targeting them.
Yeah, and we would ask for, if it's through Open City Hall, we'd ask for something like their zip code or something, so we have some sense of whether they're in the vicinity of one of the facilities.
Sound good?
Thank you.
Does everybody know where they're going?
And we would like to bring this survey back to the council. Hopefully we can do that by the 13th in a draft form, or maybe even the 6th, so that we can be sure that we're on the right track, since it's a new tool we're trying out.
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
Thanks. Any other?
Nope.
All right. The last item on our agenda, and I'm going to make Jennifer be kind of brief tonight, is unresolved issues. Jennifer Bruno's going to walk us through that. This is kind of an introduction to some of the hot topics. We can shorten it tonight because we will have 2 more opportunities to talk about unresolved issues. The primary opportunity will be next week. Our next meeting will be more time dedicated to it. So just as a sort of intro, please keep in mind that unresolved issues is kind of a catch-all for either things that council members have asked for additional information on, or ideas that people may have proposed that may or may not have funding identified for it. It's kind of a big old catch-all barrel, and but there's some pretty big stuff in it as well. And so, Jennifer, if you could sort of give us an intro, give us some highlights. We'll take some time for questions. Let's take about 10-15 minutes on this.
Okay. So as you said, this is just a catch-all, and so this is staff's sort of first attempt at the catch-all. So if there is something that has been percolating in your mind that you've been thinking about wanting to propose adjusting to the budget and you don't see it in the staff report, please let us know and we can add it and get some more information from the administration. So the first item we've listed is relating to homelessness funding. The main contact in the administration is not in town right now for homelessness services. So we committed to the administration that we would focus more on the budget logistics at this meeting of this item. And then any questions about the services we could talk about next week. But we could also get those questions about the services if you have them, so that we can be prepared for next week's discussion. So I don't know if you want to go through the detail of that, Mr. Chair, but there's a chart on page 2 that attempts to sort of consolidate what the council approved in the fiscal year 17 budget, what was added or what was requested in budget amendment number 6 to essentially backfill mostly the public services department for different services, and then also what's proposed in fiscal year 2018. And that includes the addition that the administration identified of the $155,000 for public services to help with that.
So council members, as you look at that, is there something that you don't see that you think should be there? Is there something missing? Is there something there that you have questions about? Do you have other questions that we might want to loop into this category going forward?
You're talking about the table on page 2?
Yes.
do.
It's the big bulk of homeless services.
Yeah, I
stuff.
would like to ask for the future discussion around expansion of the clean team to the clean and safe team, which is that concept that we saw in Portland.
Yeah, that was a good concept.
And I don't know if this relates to the Downtown Alliance
It
proposal.
Would totally loop into the Downtown Alliance proposal because the funding for that project's not included in the current budget proposal. So
You talking about the ambassador concept or something
No.
different?
I'm sorry.
Not the ambassador concept, but something different. than
This
that.
is different. It's
It was run through, it could be run through the Clean Team program now. And instead of police officers, they were, some were retired PD, some were folks hoping to get on Portland's police department, recruit types. But it was, they were uniformed and they had a beat. They took, I think their chamber took contributions from businesses on those block faces, and they would pay into some pool of money to help support that. But it was a consistent presence and a consistent person who knew the beat, basically. And it was cheaper than running police officers
Right.
in an expanded way.
And as I recall, they even trained some people through their homeless program. As you went through the Clean Team programming, it was designed to advance you, should you be able to, into a role with the safety team as well. I mean, there were some interesting options there.
So that actually does sound similar to what the Downtown Alliance is proposing, and I think it's been called the safety team, it's been called the ambassador team, and maybe it's just the title that's confusing, but they were proposing people that would be uniformed, that would be focused on a geographical area, that would know and engage with the homeless individuals from a safety
like we saw
perspective.
In Boston, right?
Sorry, say that again.
Similar to what we saw in Boston,
Right.
Right.
And that the chamber would match the funding from the general fund. Now, it wasn't proposed in the mayor's recommended budget, and the administration's not proposing to fund it at this time. But the council could add it to the budget if you were interested in that.
Can we, I would like to see it added so that we track it, and I think we need to have a discussion about it, and perhaps solicit a proposal from the Downtown Alliance so we have clarity on what they're asking for. Do we have a actual written proposal from them?
We just had information that they provided to the administration, not that was a request to the council. We've just sort of heard informally from staff. And
if we could get some
Okay.
formalized information about that, that would be helpful.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I brought this up last week, and we don't need to discuss it tonight, but just to flag the VOA detox beds and why there's a slight decrease in the funding for that when we know and it may be because they feel like the Community Connection Center is handling that, but just have a little clarification on that, please.
Anything else around homelessness?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, one more. I'd like to get a sense of what our outcomes are going to be for this. What are we trying to accomplish this summer particularly, or next year? It's going to be hard to know what we're trying to get done out there. Is it going to be optics? Is it cleanliness? Is it people into treatment? Is it all the above? Some way to evaluate why we're putting what we're putting together in the package. What's the package going to deliver, essentially? I'd like to see that to help narrow down how we're going to fund things and what we're going to focus on, and if we know if we did a good job or not.
Okay.
Can I add on to that, Andrew? I completely agree, and I think that I keep getting asked if this new plan with the county is such a great idea, then why aren't we implementing it right now? And I know that's a bigger conversation with our partners at the county, but I would like to see what components are planned to come online with the new HRC that we recognize would be beneficial to get, work the kinks out, so to speak, before those doors open, that we could look at implementing around the road home prior to our first HRC opening.
Okay, we'll pass those questions along to the administration so they're ready for next week's discussion.
Thank you.
They sound more system related.
So keep in mind that this is just the beginning of this conversation. If you have other things as you review this that you think of, or please connect with Jennifer about capturing any changes or discrepancies or missing items or new items.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, one other thing. If we could just highlight the Fifth West median changes, because I do think that there are some questions that we'll want to spend some more time on that.
Right, and we did receive confirmation today from the attorney's office that Class C funds are not an eligible use for the Fifth West median proposal of the paving of Fifth West. So we'll have to follow up with the administration on what their funding source is for that project.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I may just not be seeing it, but I'm thinking this is just a good time maybe to bring this up. That last week I asked really specifically about the building services plan and how that was being implemented, and I want to apologize to Mike Grieberg and to Michael Ackerlow and to Orion, because they are actually implementing a whole bunch of those things, and somehow there was a miscommunication between upstairs and downstairs with our receiving that information, and I subsequently received it, and I'm really impressed with the progress that's being made there and the implementation that is happening. So I did not intend to embarrass anyone. It was a genuine question, and I'd not received the information, and I just am pleased to see the thorough report we got on it and that things are moving forward on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Anything else around the homeless services specific? The next item is golf fund, and I'll take us through this one really quick, Jennifer. Because based on sort of the dialogue we're having with the administration and leadership, our expectation is to leave Rose Park in the golf fund for the budget, but the council staff will be looking at what's that dollar amount that we need to plug in to sustain that through the budget. And then we'll have the policy conversation around golf and Rose Park after the budget process. So we're doing a little bit like CIP. We're going to bump that to a more time for a lengthy policy conversation. Okay. I know how much how excited you are about that.
Why James left.
The next item is more, probably more of just a disclosure, so that we have the fund situation every year where we don't get the final numbers from the state tax commission on what our actual property tax revenue will be and what our actual new growth will be until June 8th. This time it means that you only have one meeting after we get those numbers to figure everything out. So maybe by way of laying the groundwork, if those numbers come in less than what's proposed in the mayor's recommended budget, you essentially have two options. One is to reduce expenses to match the funding, so you've come up with cuts to the budget to meet the revenues. The other is to just increase property taxes. The council can increase property taxes whenever, for whatever reason. You just have to go through the truth and taxation process. And the proposed budget already triggers the truth and taxation process because of just the logistics of how the funds are being proposed. The judgment levy and property tax stabilization both trigger the truth and taxation process. So you're going to go through it regardless. But that is another option, is if the numbers come in lower, you could just vote to increase taxes to match what was proposed in the mayor's recommended budget. So, and you have a whole meeting one meeting to figure that out. So just laying the groundwork for that. Number 4 is really just a table, and I don't, know that we need to go through the whole table, but this is where we're sort of keeping track of all of the little things, little items that have been raised, either as proposed additions to the budget or proposed cuts to the budget by council members over the last few weeks. So maybe tonight, rather than go through each item, we can just mention to look at this list, and if you see something that either is described incorrectly or something that's not reflected on this table, let us know and we can add it before next week's discussion.
So Jennifer, one of the things I would suggest to council members, I've noticed that a lot of these don't have revenue attached to the expense. And so council members, if you're proposing something and you have a thought about where the revenue could be generated, that would be really helpful to staff as well. And the sooner they know that, the better it is, because they have to craft that as part of the budget motions. So, and fund balance is sometimes where we look to a lot of that, but there's not going to be a lot of wiggle room in fund balance this year. So if you have an item on here that you've specifically researched some revenue options, whether that's a reduction in something else or some captured money that you've figured out that the rest of us haven't yet, please identify that to Jennifer so she can track that.
All right. And we'll have a running list next week, a running sort of live key changes so that we can see sort of each decision and what the net impact is to the budget. So that's for sure. We also have a list of potential legislative intents or contingent appropriations. And again, this is just a starting list based on conversations over the last few weeks. But if you see something on there that either isn't reflected right or that you like that you don't see on there, let us know and we can add that. So
Jennifer, one thing I would like to just flag so we track it, and I think you've already got it, is if we do a dispatch audit,
okay,
what we think that might cost and identify money for that.
All right.
As council members have an opportunity, you might want to check in and just flesh out a little better the idea that you've raised about the service that could be provided in the areas where homeless people congregate. It would be a situation where you would be providing the funding but couldn't dictate whether the administration uses that funding or not. So they could choose not to do that program. They just would then not spend the money. So it would be one of those things where it's best if it's an effort that you've talked through and all agree needs to move ahead.
Okay, thanks. Anything else, Jennifer? Any questions for Jennifer? Because of the enthusiasm and energy in the room, I'd like to stay around for another 2 hours and thank you, Jennifer. Thank you very much. Again, we'll have 2 more discussions on unresolved issues, but hopefully most of those will be taken care of next week. We'll have some time on the schedule for that following meeting just to do some wrap up of things. So we're on a very aggressive schedule for this budget approval. That's because we don't want to call a special meeting. So hopefully we're ready on the 13th. To adopt. That's at least the time frame we're working on. We're not legally required to do it until the 22nd, but that would require us scheduling a special meeting of some sort.
If we adopt on the 13th, then will we have a meeting on the 20th or not?
No.
Okay.
Tentatively, that's what we're looking at right now. It's not.
Just because it appears on our schedule here that you couldn't tell that the tentative was only if it hadn't been adopted. It sounded a little bit like there would be other fun things to talk about. So
there are always fun things to talk about, but I think we've had enough consecutive meetings. Unless you would like to make a pitch for.
It's in your ordinance on your meeting times that you just have 2.
Right, and we will have met that
June,
requirement.
And you'll be in the middle of Arts Festival set up.
Woohoo.
So you won't have exit. You can come in, but you can't go out. So, all right. That concludes all of our business for the work session today. Thank you all very much. We are adjourned.